Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Andres Barbosa, and we're going to call Dave Anderson. We're going to talk tennis, episode 153. What do you got, Andres?
Crazy, Steve. You're almost reaching the 3-year anniversary of this thing.
Yes.
Wasn't I just on the other day reviewing the first 2 years?
We keep going, 3 years. Whoa. Have we made any sense? Have I made any sense over 3 years? Calling once.
Hello.
Davey Anderson. Steve along with Andres. How's it going?
Guys, how are you?
Dave,
Good.
how are you?
Sunday evening, just enjoying the Texas heat.
This is getting to be a monthly chat with Dave Anderson. Where to begin with one conversation that I don't really like to engage in with all sports. Greatest of all time. Greatest
of all time.
Tennis player.
Can you vote for yourself?
With,
I mean, you know, I have always had I think I've said it here before, that I've had a little bit of a Roger fetish in how I've admired him. But I think in any sport that I think it's just one of those conversations that nobody's ever going to win. Having said that, with Federer, I mean, I used to kind of cheer against Djokovic whenever he was on, and over the past years, I mean, the respect kind of that Djokovic, in my mind, anyways, has earned. And I don't know. I mean, it's it's just one of those things. I think if you ask any of those guys, they would probably, at least in public, say that it's just a moot point, really. And but Djokovic is certainly establishing himself as a hard person to vote down from that position. But I think it's a difficult thing to say. I mean, I remember Billy Freer asking him that as Federer was dominating the world and Rafa was coming on to dominate. Billy was a part of the Rod Laver and Rose Wall era, and had the privilege of competing on the tour against Laver, and he said it was 0-0 before he even blinked, and he just said in his mind he thought Laver was the greatest, and he said that he thought Federer was very, very close to that, but maybe it's just the way those guys played. It was more aesthetically pleasing, maybe. Very difficult. I mean, Fed's always going to be number one in my mind, so from my end, but I don't know if there's logic behind it at this point, but just more emotion.
So I'm going to take the counter on this.
Yeah.
And I always think back to, I used to have regular lunches with Patricio Rodriguez and Pato Apey. So both these guys were Chilean players, Chilean Davis Cup players, practiced with Hopman's group back in the day when they were young on tour. In Rodriguez's case, he coached, let me see how many I can get. He probably started with Jose Luis Clerc, then he went to Andres Gomez, then he went to Lepenti, then he went to Masu. So, I mean, he was coaching a lot of players, and he said the best he had ever seen was Roy Emerson. So when a guy like that had been around every great player in the last 50, 60 years, it was kind of hard for me to say anything. And then and Pato Apey would say that the best he had ever seen was Rod Laver.
Yeah.
So then the other point is that now you see all these guys are playing 90 slams by the time their careers are done, and you see a guy like Borg who had 26 slams or 28 slams. So is it there's no doubt that medicine is better and longevity is extending, but shouldn't winning percentages amongst tournaments played be a little bit higher on the criteria than solely slams won?
Well, I just think,
go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was just going to say, with that, majors, that's really what it's based on now. But that's where tennis history becomes very complex. Who played majors, who didn't play majors. When it was amateur, under the table, wasn't pro tennis. Laver didn't play between 62 and 69. But go ahead.
Take it a step further. Like back then, wasn't a WCT played in Dave's neck of the woods, and that was considered to a lot of players a pretty big event. In Australia for a long time wasn't considered a big event. So
SMU, Moody Coliseum, WCT finals. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote this down. On any given day, every champion has their day. Jimmy Connors, if someone was going to play for your life, who would you pick? He used to say Gonzalez and McEnroe. With Vic Braden used to say, on any given day, the great Aussie Popeye. Trivia question. Lou Hode.
That was Francisco Montana's senior. His pick for the greatest player he had ever seen. So, yeah, it's hard for me to argue with guys that had seen way more generations of players than I had. So,
with matchups, that's where was it Rocky 5? Rocky 6.
Steve,
Rocky 6. Now, was it 7 or 8?
You had your chance. That one Rocky episode, you had your chance. You blew it. That'll be on the 3-year review.
Sampras versus Djokovic. How does Djokovic return?
I mean, I think Sampras wins that match, depending on the exact kind of court they're playing on, not just on grass, but I think he does win it on grass.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that the right speed hard court, he's still in the hunt for it. I think that generation is still so, so closely linked, really. And if you understand tennis, I don't think that's a past generation at all. I think it just gets trickier when you start looking at Lavers and people like that to many people. But you can trace people direct back with a few indirects here pretty deep into the years, into the early 70s. But I think depending on the surface, I would pick Sampras over that. I like that. Unfortunately, it was just an exhibition when Fed and Pete went on that Asian swing and made that little exhibition style tour of theirs. And one of the I talk about all the time when I had the privilege of sitting there watching Federer on that slow court at Indian Wells and what he did to Rafa that day. I personally haven't seen a tennis ball hit like that in my life for 2 sets. And, I don't know if that kind of level has been replicated too often in our sport, to be honest.
The comment that you made on Novak and Sampras, I was mentioning to Steve here that I'm pretty sure that Kyrgios and Djokovic have played 8 sets, and I think Novak has only broken them twice.
Yeah.
And, Kyrgios is probably the guy with the closest serve to me, resembling Sampras. And obviously Sampras could back it up much stronger in a much different manner than what Kyrgios can. So that would lead me to agree with you as far as that particular matchup. And take it a step further. How many times did we watch Federer in that matchup with Nadal and struggle with the Nadal serve? How is he going to match up with McEnroe? Let's say a guy that doesn't allow him to just block the return back and play or just get the point started. He's going to force him to have to come over a lot more returns. So, that whole GOAT discussion, it seems so basic when you see it on TV. They're just going with, the biggest number. And I guess logically it makes sense, but there's also people commenting just don't have enough of a knowledge base, I think, to really be commenting.
Well, I think an intangible that I always try to throw in there is who's really leaving the game in a better place and a cleaner place than when they found it. And I think, to me, that's right up there with their number of tournament victories and Grand Slam titles and Slam titles. And it just, the legacy they leave, is it going to be one that helps the sport or hurts the sport? And I think that's not factored in ever, but it certainly should be.
No, it's a very good point. I think another one is at their prime. So when Federer beat Sampras, and granted the exhibition series that you mentioned, I went to one of those in Madison Square Garden. It was really good theater, but at that time, Sampras had already retired, and it was just, it was not a competitive match. It was an exo. On the women's side, when you just think about Monica Seles, what a tragedy when she was stabbed. I think it was, you're the fact checker, I think she won 8 out of 9 majors.
She had won 3 the year before, maybe like 7 out of 8. Yeah, she was dominant.
Definitely dominating, and people just, it's like her name's never even mentioned. And what an amazing run.
Yeah, she was something else.
What you said about accomplishments, I also, from a tennis teaching standpoint, many times, I cheer for the person I think will help tennis teaching. When you have someone who comes up with a very unorthodox style, it's going to be very difficult. They're getting by, whether it's just, and generally it's more the wizardry of their competitive mind than genetics. And it's like kids don't try this at home.
It's interesting. You guys, I think, spoke about it on a recent podcast about, I forgot who exactly. It might have been, has the Federer Nadal matchup or legacy. It seems like more kids have gone off and copied Nadal. If you go back, Agassi, Sampras, more people seem to have copied Agassi. Take it in the women's game, Martina and Chris, people were copying Chris. I mean, you can go back even further. Connors, McEnroe, people seem to copy Connors. So, that's another aspect to coaching that it seems like, who are the coaches out there that are actually trying to teach players to play like the Navratilovas, Federers, Samprases? It just doesn't seem like there's very many.
Yeah, it's always been intriguing to me exactly what you said. And you look at even, I think Agassi definitely had an impact, but you look at a guy like Tiafoe. We had a kid that went out when he was a junior, and he had just kind of caught fire. So he got invited out to a camp out there when Tiafoe was a kid at JTCC, and the boy came back from being clean, really clean. In fact, he beat Bellamy's kid who started the Tennis Channel, and that kind of put him on the map. And then suddenly he was gone for a month, and he came back after a month, and his forehand was a spitting image of Tiafoe's. And 2 things popped into my head there. One, just star power and how peer pressure, whether good or bad, it seems like the bad is copied more than the good, and how quickly a negative change can occur and how long it takes sometimes to make a positive adjustment in some kids' games. But I think Tiafoe, when I go to tournaments, I see, I see a lot of kids mocking Kyrgios's forehand, or not mocking it, just trying to emulate it. And those guys have definitely impacted tennis teachers or tennis players under 18, it seems, a lot in the last 10 years.
No, that's an interesting point about star power. But even with the stars, and Andres mentioned, so many pairs, like say Navratilova and Everett, or Sampras and Agassi. But it's like there's a moat around the net, and it's just filled with monsters that people just not going forward, not playing from the service line in.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting if they sped the courts up. If they sped the courts up around the world on the tour, got rid of a little of the grit in the courts, and just got in a time machine or went back to the 3 or 4 slams on the grass, and then just did it for 5-7 years, and just to see the impact it would have, after that time on people's technical skills, tactical style of play. But it'll never happen, but it'd be interesting to see.
I mean, do you think the speeding up the courts is the only thing that needs to be done? I mean, it's going to be.
I don't think so, but I think it would not necessarily just speeding up the courts, but I think it's sometimes I think it's a combination. I mean, I think that the core of it is really what the GreatBase is all about. At the core of it, it's people having a greater understanding of the sport that are coaching and teaching the sport, and then really doing it in a manner where people are fully developed to play every zone of the court. I mean, the speeding up of the court really won't change. It might make people go in a little more, but I think that over time it wouldn't hurt it. But I mean, sending kids into the net, is when they don't have skill sets, it's just like throwing up a grenade and running under it. And I think at the core of it, it's the coaching industry has to really push that direction and understand how critical it is to our sport overall. I mean, it's affecting so many different areas of it, and certainly doubles is becoming just non-existent. It doesn't even look like the doubles that we remember from just a few years back.
Tennis Sangren, player from Tennessee, spent time around tennis through Austin Krajicek. They're big buddies. They played doubles together. They're the same age, came out together. I heard him say that they should bring back, one thing to improve the game is bring back wooden rackets. The game is much more aesthetically appealing, was his comment. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I'm going to go back to what Dave was talking about earlier. I mean, it has to start at the junior level. I mean, if you speed up the courts a little bit, guys might come in a little bit more, but they'll still be hitting the same drop volleys when they come in. They're still going to be collapsing the racket. They're not going to be, as you've mentioned, will Sampras be the last true great volleyer that we've seen? So, we haven't really seen very many players. And again, it was Ed Crass that had the one-on-one doubles. I mean, that's a great thing if you were to get kids doing that much sooner. So, but
yeah,
with this,
it's got to be an approach.
Sorry,
go ahead, Andre.
Well, let me just interject for Ed Crass, Ghost doubles. I remember the first time I saw it was Bob Hewitt was playing for McMillan, and double specialist. The deuce court player stays in the deuce court house, and vice versa. And for the listeners, they just play cross court. And we do it where it's mandatory, you got to serve and volley. But Ed, one time, Tommy Haas said, hey, why don't you keep one-on-one, but have them stay back. But Ed's gone back to where really emphasizing serving going forward. It's part of the rules, and you get bonuses for, say I have to go back and double check, but if you hit an overhead, win the point, there's some bonuses involved. But I think we know now more than we did before on how the brain works. Is if players aren't programmed from the get-go to go forward. So I do think with the wooden rackets, it'd be interesting. I know Pete Sampras, speaking of him, he was asked years ago, what would you do to improve tennis? And he said would have to play with a wooden racket to the age of 13. He was asked if his son was playing tennis, what would you recommend as he learned to play with a wooden racket?
I mean, you watch a lot of people that played with the wood, my age or older, that had wood in their hand at some point in juniors, and even if they had inefficient grip off the ground, which most of the players were holding a version of it, the Australian grip or something on the forehand, and but they do have long hitting zones, even without having the efficiency. I mean, it's interesting, but I think what Andres was saying, I mean, it's got to be it's really got to come from, the ground up, and it's got to start early on, and it's just got to be a more unified approach systematically from our tennis teaching groups of people as a whole. And it isn't as simple as tennis 1, 2, 3 and quick start. And and all of that, and it just isn't that. And I think that's what separates us from a sport like pickleball. I mean, it is an instant mediocrity. It's a challenge, and but it's worth the challenge if you hang in there and do it in a way where you can really learn to play the sport. And it's a little bit more like chess, and I think some of these other things coming in are a little bit more like checkers. And my grandkids can play checkers at age 3, but they can't play chess, and that's just reality, and they have to learn to.
Go ahead, Andres. Well, one thing with change, if you make a list of 100 things. In the U.S., if you went back to where they just took private lessons. I mean, there was no homeschooling. There was, kids hitting the backboard, calling their friends up, doing basketballs, playing mini tennis. I mean, you can make a long list on, why things are the way they are. Coming back to change, though, I heard Gigi Fernandez say that if they made the net 6 inches higher, I've also heard if they drew the court differently. In other words, they brought the service line in to bring tennis back into it, where it's not. And I don't really like the phrase "serve plus one" because I just don't think you should be hearing that when you're 12 or younger. These kids are arching their back, tossing over their head. They think they're doing something on the serve. They're hitting high trajectory, so the ball kicks some, and then they have extreme grip, and it's just, serve and slap. They're running around backhands from all parts of the court to hit a forehand.
It's going to be interesting now watching Wimbledon. It's like, will we ever see the days that the grass is brown up by the service line again? They don't play very many doubles on the stadium court, so it's literally like one brown line across the baseline. So let's see if anybody this year kind of, Alcaraz might serve and volley a little bit. Kyrgios, if he's healthy, might serve and volley a little bit. But it seems like it would actually be a smart play to do, just to rough up the turf a little bit for the ground strokers. The ball would not be as easy to move, not that easy to bounce. But
yeah, I don't think in our lifetime. Well, mine. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it'll be an interesting trend. I mean, I had a guy tell me just in life in general. He was an Olympic athlete. I was yelping about generations and this and that, and he said, just be patient. It'll circle back. And he was probably 85 years old at the time. But he told me his story, and he said in his lifetime things circled back. And I think I would think that the other players seeing Alcaraz go forward a little bit more than the norm might be alerted that there's something headed that way for sure. I mean, that trend could trigger something in the pro game, and the juniors tend to be so influenced by the pro game and junior coaches, and but I still think it just it's quality education from the beginning, and getting people equipped, and going back to something I know Steve has preached for decades, and let's introduce the game to people from the net backward, and get them to have those kind of skills, but junior tennis doubles has become just a sideshow, really, and college has followed suit, and until that comes alive a little bit more, maybe, and gets rebuilt and rekindled, I think that's going to be a very difficult uphill battle.
Well, I think more of a study. I mean, Djokovic has improved so much from the service line in. He comes in way more than people think he does. Obviously, he's so good from the baseline. I mean, he's such a spectacular athlete. I mean, he's so flexible. Nadal, he's right up there if you're going to say, well, okay, who's the best at closing in? The way he closes in, and he's certainly got a lot of downplay with the grip he has on the backhand volley. You go back to Borg and Everett, people say, oh, they never came to the net. That's not true. That's what's amazing about YouTube is you can go back and, watch the tapes of Borg, who 6 years in a row, he won 5 in a row, but 6 years in a row, he's in the Wimbledon final. And, Chrissy, I mean, you get in line and watch her play mixed doubles, and the way that was played, it was, as Martina Navratilova would say, that was real doubles where people are going in. And then if you really understand tactics, I mean, Brady used to say it so well, is the best way to play is 2 up at the net. Second best way to play is 2 back. Worst way to play is 1 up, 1 back. Most universally played, 1 up, 1 back. I think it all comes back to people want to win, and they want to win now. The kid no doubt wants to win. The parent of the kid, I think for the most part, winning doesn't summarize that you're getting better. You're matched up against the kid on the other side of the net. It's not a measuring tape. It's not a stopwatch. So people get lost in those early kid triumphs, but then it just keeps on going with Andre said it's got to start in the beginning. You said it.
I was hoping Maxime Cressy would be the one that would start bringing it back, but he seems more intent to try to go for 2 aces and come forward versus ever hitting a second serve kick and coming in. He's kind of gone a completely different way.
We were talking about Max Cressy earlier today. Joey Johnson, who from way back when, grew up in your part of the world, and his son Spencer went on a mission with the Latter-day Saints, a Mormon mission, and he's back and he's going to UCLA. And we did some video work with him today, or for him today. And to me, I think it's just amazing that right now Max Cressy is like the one and only on the men's side who serves and volleys. And I don't think you can say there's anyone. I mean, Barty was certainly someone who played doubles really well and could mix it up.
Misha Zverev retired. Feliciano Lopez would do it occasionally, I guess, on grass. But yeah, there's nobody left.
But that's where, do people really understand the point combinations when you're the green light point, Bill Jacobson, when you're up 40 love by 3 points, 40-15, 30 love, the math is on your side. Or even when you get the break points, people don't realize that, that's also your time to be aggressive. You're down love 40, your chances of winning, take that second serve return and come in and do it early in the match. But people, we just say it over and over again. A kid will go year after year and not play any patterns. They just play the same way. And they're not going to be good at anything but what they do over and over again.
Well, and I think you said it last time we spoke, Steve, too, how, and people that listen that aren't maybe plugged in completely to the system and the initiative of the GreatBase, but those kids that you're talking about, too, many of them we're teaching day in and day out, and they just don't do it when they're playing matches. And they have the skill sets, they've built them, and they rep them in practice, and they're not getting the real world exposure. And it's all that, like you said, I mean, the perceived pressure to win, the whether it's internal in the player's mind or whether it's part of their culture at their household, or maybe even the coaches to blame in some cases too. People just have to have more guts the way they play. I always have kids go back and watch Henman and Sampras at the French Open when they both made pretty deep runs in their style of play at the French. And, what I would definitely say is this, this era of tennis, and Henman went really deep. And I don't think people think of Henman as a natural clay courter, but Sampras as well. And when he started trying to play like a clay courter, shortly after that, his results really never again got up to that point when he played that tournament.
I've heard people say that Sampras became very good friends with the late Vitas Gerulaitis, and towards the latter part of Sampras's career, I mean, I remember one time being in Tampa. I was at a tennis facility. He's hitting golf balls, and 2 days later, he's got to be at the French. I think that year he lost to Philip Poussis. And at that point in his career, he wasn't, I'm sure he had endorsement obligations to go play the French, but he wasn't showing up to win the French. But no, for sure, you can play all over the court. Let's just talk a little bit, greatest of all time and star power. What did juniors see and what makes it difficult to teach? I know I've been at junior tournaments and put the hoodie up and hide behind a tree and they're playing doubles, and the kids that you've worked with, they don't think you're there watching, and they want to win that 2-inch trophy, and they're playing one up, one back. And you just mentioned guts. I mean, guts and brains.
Yeah, you could take it a step further with your, when you're talking about that these players are copying what they see on TV with Curios. But I've always believed that the commentators do tennis players, especially developing ones, a terrible injustice. They simplify it in such a way where every time they miss wide, they say they should have played a simple target. It's just the same repeated cliches over and over. Now, I always think of Tony Trabert when I was a young kid watching on TV, and and I wish I would have taken this, so I'm guilty as well. But Trabert used to say, if you're coming in 20 times, if you win 11 times, if you win the point 11 times, you've done a great job. Keep it going. But most players never can accept the 9 points that they're going to play. So I'm sorry, the 9 points that they're going to lose. So that basically just wears on their mind the 9 points that they either missed a volley or got past versus the 11 that they won, applying pressure, knocking off a volley, forcing an error on the passing shot. So it's really, that Steve has talked about this forever about tennis math, but, he likes to talk about juniors playing a tournament, him not seeing 10 overheads in a tournament. You can go to a lot of practices on a daily basis where kids are homeschooling and playing 5-6 hours a day. You might not see 10 overheads in a practice. So, it really starts young, and we're having some sort of idea of what the goal is 10 years from now. I just don't think coaches are doing a good enough job, and parents are not doing a good enough job learning on their own end.
I think with situational training, we do a drill 4-and-4. You can change up the scoring format any way you want, but you have to hit an underspin lob on the forehand side as a feeder, and then the next point a backhand. And you can have them hit one-handed or two-handed players, so they have to alternate. It really helps with, like, say, the kid who has an extreme grip, so they get closer to a conventional grip to at least hit a defensive lob with underspin. Person on the other side has to touch the net. They have to let the ball bounce, and then from there they play the point out. Another situational drill is one player is going to serve underhand, and you have to come to the net. And you can't, crush and rush. You can't blast the ball. You have to play an approach shot. And then you, winner moves up, loser moves down, and you actually play situations. But then still, it's not a tournament. They're doing it in practice. And practice in some ways is, to use a word, is artificial compared to the tournament time, the real deal.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, but it is. And the same emotional investment. Yeah, I do a lot of that here with the coaches and kids too. We just have them play full matches, and they just score traditionally. Other than if somebody hits a winning volley, 2 points. If somebody hits a winning overhead, they get 3 points. So, if a kid's down love 30, love 40, they can play catch up really quick by playing aggressively midcourt in and trying to knock something off up there. But I think it always goes back to, if they didn't do that a lot early on, they have to have more of a Herculean effort in their will and their spirit. And it seems like, I hate to sound, stereotyping anything, but it seems like in this generation that sometimes the will and spirit isn't athletically what it was just a generation or two ago. And I don't know if it's because of everything. It's a little bit more micromanaged, or, I think that it's always tough to see your kids struggle and have to sacrifice. And I think that the reality, though, is we may be dealing with a period of time where the average teenager hasn't really struggled and had a lot of sacrifice in their life, and certainly losing a tennis match isn't sacrifice or struggle, in my opinion. And I think that the character of the athlete is challenged as a result of that.
Dave mentioned earlier about the overlap in eras, as far as, you can go back Agassi and Connors and probably go back 30, 35 years. I can't tell you how often during lunch when I'm with kids, I will turn on YouTube on my phone the Agassi Connors match at the U.S. Open, and show them, Connors hitting, the tabletop backhand, tabletop forehand, and explain to them that's what you can look to try to do on a second serve return. You get something. Steve just mentioned scenarios, but again, I think when people think or hear chip and charge, they're not realizing that what Connors is doing on the backhand is a tabletop backhand with a slight underspin on the backhand. That should be the goal, and you just don't see that anymore. You just, the first reaction from the kids is like, that doesn't look right. That, because they're, but to them, the Nadal forehand does look right? If they're all 10 years old, having a Western grip and makes sense to them. So it's definitely a challenge, but I mean, there needs to be more coaches trying to make that impression. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I hope Sebi Korda makes a breakthrough here. I think it'd be good for everybody. I hope I think he hits the ball well and could be a positive check for the people teaching the game. And I watched his match with Alcaraz yesterday, and he's just coming off injury, but looks like he's getting back. I think he could be a person, whether he has the star power to influence people, I don't know. But he does a lot of things well.
So the family does a lot of things well. My word, what type of Kool-Aid do they have? What the two daughters have done in golf. But both parents, they obviously understand sport. And the mother was a world-class player. The father's a world-class player. With Korda, I know Matt Clore, we've had on as a guest and done a number of things with Matt over the last 15 years. He had a chance to, and we've touched upon this, watching Peter just play mini tennis with his son. But I was told that when he played a lot of sports, he played ice hockey. They were over in Bradenton at the IMG, the former Bolletary Tennis Academy. This is for the parents, is that when he was a young kid, they didn't allow him to play other boys at the academy. I mean, that's hearsay, who I heard that from. Did I talk to one of his parents? No, but that teenage boys can be a little bit wacko. So it's who's king for the day. It's just, I think so many things were done, but he does hit the ball really well. He's improved his serve. There was a little bit of a problem with his serve.
I saw that. I saw yesterday it was in the 130s a few times. Happened overnight.
Yeah,
but he's got a quiet mind. He's a peaceful warrior. There's a lot to be said about that with anxiety. Let's come back to this greatest of all time. Just how about the greatest returner of all time? Years ago, people used to talk on the men's side about Jan Kotić, the great player from Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia. But then it really is gone Connors, Agassi, and Djokovic. And is Djokovic way behind the baseline?
Hewitt has been completely forgotten in that.
Yeah, okay.
What I saw him do to Sampras at that U.S. Open was, the poor guy might not have had the long shelf life of others, but at the top, but that was an unbelievable returner. No,
but let's go over a story, Dave. Why don't you tell the listeners about the first time you saw Hewitt? He was at Newcomb's. You saw him at a junior tournament.
Yeah. Shout out to Johnny Walker, this young guy that was in our program. I used to call him Chili because his parents put a bowl over his head and cut his hair, which reminded me of the old days. And so we called him Chili Bowl. But he was, one of the better juniors in Texas. Texas junior tournaments, in my opinion, used to be much more significant. They were, there wasn't a saturated system that, just welcomed all. And the tournament was pretty tough down in Austin. It was called the Austin Super Champ Major Zone, and the kid I was coaching was one of the better players, and seeded fairly high in the top couple. And David Martin, who went on to play at Stanford, was the 1 seed, and he was 1 in America. And this kid I coach, he drew this name that was not seeded, first round, and they were heading off to the courts, and it was in the 16s. And so this boy was much younger, but the way he carried his bag just looked different, and the way he walked, and he had these skinny little legs, and at the UT intramural courts, I think they had 55 courts. Right from the first ball, you could hear this kid and his exhaling and his footwork. It wasn't pounding the ball. His ball was really being hit with shape on the forehand and pretty Cam Norrie-ish on the backhand, just like we remember. And my guy came off and was cussing and wanting to break rackets. And, I told him, I said, I think you just lost to a guy who's definitely going to be a top 50 player. And it turned out it was a young Leighton Hewitt just traveling through. And shortly after that is when he went down to Brisbane and beat Andre Agassi. And, a year and a half later. And, but he just, I think he was a machine.
No, I'm glad you brought up Hewitt, Andres, and that's a great story. When he beat Agassi wasn't being rude, but Leighton Hewitt comes on the court and he's got the baseball cap and the hair coming out all different sides of the baseball cap, and he didn't have that he didn't have a matching outfit. He didn't, he maybe had a Fila top and Nike shorts, and Agassi said, "Hey, during the breaks, if you bring me this type of water or this type of Gatorade, whatever, from the ice chest," and Hewitt went and got him the water, and then Agassi apologized to him because when they started warming up, he was warming up with Hewitt, and he actually lost that match. A coach up in Connecticut when he was really young many years ago, Ryan Ginley, I always remember this, is that he was talking to a group of players, junior players. He had his players from the New England area and had a training session going on, and I was in Tampa 15 years, and he just told his group of kids, you can't necessarily be like Federer, a young Federer at that time. You can't be like a Sampras, but you can be like Hewitt. And I think if Nadal comes from soccer, he just, his uncle was a member of the World Cup team in Spain, and he's from a soccer mentality. But Hewitt, he's not from a tennis mentality. He's from Aussie football. And so we could put him in there. He amazing tennis player. And actually, coming down to his game, when he was 19, he won US Open doubles. I mean, people forget that too. But if I were just I'd have to get some film out. But those 3 returners, Djokovic is not as far back as some of the players are today, correct?
I mean, at the French Open, he was. He tried to mix it up a little bit. Yeah, I would say on average, he's not. He's on top of the baseline relatively, like Connors and Agassi and Hewitt, if we were going to add him.
But my question is that if you're on the other side of the net and they're not coming in, you can stay back. I mean, it's a famous Roger Federer quote that he said that the level play at Wimbledon is frightening low because I know less than 2% of the time my opponents are coming in. But what do you think, guys? If the people were coming in more, would the people return closer to the baseline?
Well, I mean,
go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead, Andres. You go.
I mean, I think it's for sure, seeing guys way back behind the baseline of return has been going on for a long time, right? I mean, I wasn't really watching the Borg McEnroe era, but whenever I put it up on YouTube, you see Borg way back behind the baseline in New York playing him. And then if you were to go back into the early 90s, you had guys like Bruguera on a hard court or Thomas Muster. They'd be pretty far back. Guga on obviously on clay, some of these guys. So now in some cases, some of these guys had more extreme grips on the return, especially if they were one-handed like a Gaudio. So maybe he'd need the time to sort of make the grip change. But yeah, I mean, obviously but that's where the definition of clay quarter or grass quarter back then was noticeable because you could see the difference in the court surfaces. Now where it's all relatively homogenized, the returners have much more of a chance and the servers are actually hurt a little bit. So, but, going back to what I mentioned earlier with Dave is that I'm not sure a lot of these big servers still would be able to come forward and knock off a volley the way, now maybe they'd be more focused on doing that from the ages of 15 to 22, perhaps. But I mean, it seems like something that needs to be addressed a lot sooner in the developmental process.
I do think with Max Cressy, his record of losing in first rounds, I mean, I think he's got as high as 38 in the world. But I do think that players now have a book, in the locker room, people are telling each other, okay, this is what you need to do when you're playing against Cressy. Got to make him hit one volley and then go from there.
Yeah, it's interesting watching him play. Obviously he's going big on every second serve. I guess he doesn't trust his volley at all. But I'm kind of interested when I watch him play how he plays on the second serve return, right? He's able to, seemingly he's got a pretty good grasp with a two-handed backhand. Like you rarely see him hit the two-handed backhand and come in and apply pressure that way. So, and these guys seemingly are playing everything to his forehand, trying to see if they can break down the forehand side. But he seems very content to stay back there and rally with these guys. And, I don't think he's got much of a chance that way.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it
Dave.
doesn't look well. When it's funny with the returners too. I mean, and I don't know all the stats of it, but I've been over the years just followed stats, seeing some of the year-end stuff, and it's always kind of interesting to me to see a guy in the top 5 on the return stats like Taylor Dent, and again Tim Henman one year, guys that people I don't think pick as great returners, but the stat is really a byproduct of their tactical style, and they're applying pressure, but they're applying it not really with the return of Djokovic and Agassi and Connors, but they're just taking serves and really pressuring with position. Many times throughout their career, they were going forward off it, and when both of them could nullify any kind of serve really for the most part. I mean, Henman obviously had some issues with a few things on his swings, as did Taylor Dent. That they both have been at the top of the charts, not through their whole career, but at different times. For a year-ending stat. There's more than one way to skin the cat. In other words, I think, and I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that I see in junior tennis is that, especially on the girls' side, everybody, a lot of parents think that their daughter has to hit a winner on the return, and that's being aggressive, and that's how they want to play, and they see a few players that do that out on the circuit and take a crack at it and connect. But again, I think they're skipping steps in the development. They really can't make returns first before they go out and do that, and they can't hit targets. So yeah, I think returning is, to me, the separator. I mean, I think, if I go to TCU or SMU down here and watch a college match, I'm going to see a lot of great serving. But I mean, in world-class play, even if we don't include if we include the majority of the players, to me, returning is just a separator in the sport.
Going back to the greatest of all time, with juniors watching players, I mean, Andres and Dave, I mean, how powerful do you think that is where, you're teaching kids, okay, you're 13 steps to the net, 130 degrees potential angle, win 2 out of 3, 4 out of 6, the aggressive air margin, managed by stats. But yet they will turn the TV on and the very best players in the world are pretty much playing backcourt tennis. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I think one thing, again, going back to TV, is we see the same players all the time, right? There's they don't always give the best match at that particular time. So, again, I actually really like Coco Gauff, but we only see her matches on TV. Another girl's name escapes me. The girl that just got to the final of French. I've watched that girl play for a couple of years now. Love her game. Unless you're a really diehard tennis fan, this was the only time you really got to see her. And she's
Muchova.
Mukova, there you go. Sorry, Muchova. But beautiful tennis player. And it's just not enough is done to sort of put those people in a position where they can be seen. So, and
then also with her, the story behind the story with the injury and, then also doubles. She has the game, mom and dad, be able to play doubles with, that's a great example. We see the players too many times. It's great to be, watching Venus back playing. She's 44. When she was at her prime playing on grass, what an athlete. With, I used to say about Serena at one point, the only person who could beat Serena was Serena. And here in the U.S., you were going to watch Serena's match, even if she's rolling. She's won the first set 6-1, and there's all these other outstanding matches going on. But it is true that you don't get to see a wide selection of players.
Yeah, and it's a shame that Barty retired early. It's a shame that Henin has been, that rivalry with Henin and Serena was cut short maybe like 10 years ago. So, that's the other thing. I mean, it's interesting to me when I hear that greatest of all time on the women's side. Margaret Court is completely forgotten. I saw a list the other day where they were mentioning the greatest female athletes of all time. And Serena was number one. And again, didn't bother me. I did not see Martina Navratilova's name on the list, who was probably the best player I've ever seen. But I did see Billie Jean King's name on the list. And Margaret Court just pretty much owned Billie Jean King in their career. So it's kind of also interesting the way tennis history is relayed, sometimes by the perspective of others, and is not always accurate or not always forthcoming enough. But it's an injustice. I mean, I just think a lot of people don't get enough of an idea of what tennis is and aren't exposed to the different ways, as Dave is saying about skinning a cat here. I mean, there's different ways to play, and you just never see it. You just see basically the same patterns over and over.
Yeah, that's a great point about short memories. About
that's a real that's not just a short memory. That's a bad memory when you leave Navratilova off the list.
Yeah, with I do think you could break it down with Serena. Oh my word, her serve. I mean, her second serve is better than most men's. You just got to look at what the radar gun shows us. But Ash Barty, I think they talk about loss of memory is that people forget how complete a player she was, but also too is with television, they didn't really see her play doubles enough. And then by being a really good doubles player, then she has all these options playing singles. So Ash Barty, everybody, her fellow competitors loved her. You never hear anybody say a bad word about her, the way she handled herself, but just skill set. So the position on the return, that's one thing. It seems to me that people forget about a Connors or an Agassi. Connors was asked, what was your legacy? He said, I proved to people that you could take the ball on the rise. So the pros are listening to the pros. Agassi was asked, what's your legacy? He said, well, I took it one step further than Jimmy. I proved that you could take it on the rise and hit top. And I think the pitcher versus the batter, I've heard that comparison with Sampras being the pitcher, the baseball analogy, and Agassi the batter. When you go so far back, you give your opponent so much angle, and then they can get closer to the net. I think if they didn't change the grass at Wimbledon, if they had left the contrast of play, we could all, we talk about rackets and strings and balls, but just the surface itself, there was people who world-class players wouldn't even go and play Wimbledon. They would just skip the tournament because it was, now the pros, you'll hear them say that you can play the same way on every surface.
Yeah, but even before they changed the grass, I mean, you had Courier getting to a finals at the French. I'm sorry, at Wimbledon. You had Agassi winning it. You had Mal Washington getting to a final. So, it's not like baseliners didn't have a chance with the old grass, but it just seems that there's just less and less players nowadays that are even attempting to play the style of coming forward. So, and again, I mean, everybody talks about the Novak return and how great it is. I always remember when I was growing up, I think it was 91, that I remember looking at the top 10 list in the world. And you had guys like Lendl, Becker, Ivanisevic, Steek. I mean, I'm probably missing out a few other great servers, Sampras, obviously. Just seems like back then there were more great servers. So a lot of these returners like an Agassi, I think, should be almost elevated a notch because they were really going against elite servers. Whereas today, the only guys that I'd maybe put in that same category with those guys that I mentioned are obviously Kyrgios and actually Djokovic. You got to put up there. He's improved so much on his serve. It's incredible.
When you look at pro players, you can say, well, okay, let's go through it. And what's their story been? What's their history? And you do the same thing with someone who's a competitive junior college player. Lendl was 87, I believe, fact checker, where he lost at Pat Cash. And the gentleman had to sign up, I'll take cash versus a check. And with that, Tony Roach, what a great player he was. And it's amazing from a coaching standpoint who he worked with. He worked with Federer. But, he just told Lendl, he said, you're too greedy, you're worried about the money, and you're too cocky. You're worried about the ranking. And the story is, he skipped Wimbledon and said he was allergic to grass, but he was being interviewed on a golf course when he said that. So he's a player that had skipped Wimbledon, but then he skipped the French because he had won everything. And what Tony Roach had said to him was, you've won everything. Serve and volley year round. You want to win Wimbledon, play year round no matter where you are. I'm always telling kids, you can practice on a hard court with a clay court mentality. I mean, you could play on a clay court with the mentality that you're playing on really fast carpet. Einstein, imagination is greater than knowledge. And, Forrest Gump, stupid is what stupid does. It's like, okay, practice is practice. It's like if a kid was a tennis player, they can only play one song. There's just no variety, and it's like have some fun. I remember Dave Secker, who we've had on several times. He was watching a young gal who we worked with, Sophia Patel. I mean, very good player to get a scholarship to go to UNC, and because she could really hit volleys and hit overheads. She spent years and years with us. She started with Matt Clore, and Secker just said to her, "Don't you think it's fun to hit volleys and overheads?" I mean, people will show up at theme park for the adventure. Okay, I want to get on this. I want to get on this roller coaster and have some fun. But yet, winning, I think, really is the number one thing. It's a curse. It's like this is what I trust. But you can all the way to the pros. Now, Pat Cash, who beat Lendl, he's an Aussie, but not only did the Aussies growing up, and not as much as they used to, have the chance to play on grass, but one thing that the Aussies have always had over a lot of people is the appreciation of players from the past. I grew up in ice hockey, and I always say no one would ever say that Bobby Orr couldn't play in today's game. And we have some fun talking about matchups. Like Andy Roddick versus Jimmy Connors. Connors coached him for a little bit. There's some stories I heard because I did some work with the Roddick Tennis Academy that were fun, but matchups. Let's talk about slice when we talk about greatest of all time. How many of the greatest of all time can actually use that as a tool of variety?
Yeah, it's interesting because you almost have to define almost like the different levels of slices, right? Like you had a guy like Connors who was a lot flatter. You've got an Edberg who was still penetrating, but maybe not as exactly as flat. And then you had guys like Pat Rafter that were able to just hang back there behind on the baseline with Agassi and would just lull deep slice backhands over and over and over, rallying with Agassi from the back. So, yeah, actually, Dave, you can add that one to your French Open semifinal. Rafter did it too.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just. I think a lot of players mistake the slice backhand as an emergency backhand. I think there's not enough guys that treat the slice backhand as a ball sitting up and that you're going to drive the slice down the line. I just don't think that people distinguish those two types of slice backhands.
Yeah, I mean, I had that time with Billy Freer where I'd probe him about players from the past, and he was up a set in 4-1 on Rosewall, and ended up losing it badly in the third. But, he told me, we used to hit balls when I came here in the early days, and Billy told me Rosewall's underspin backhand actually penetrated and pushed him back. But I think it's like, the word slice, the connotation in people's brains may be different than what we're thinking. And, just like people can vary different levels of topspin. But to me, I've watched Rosewall a ton in slow motion, old footage back when the WCTs were held here in Dallas, and he and Labor were battling it out. And, but that thing could penetrate. I mean, I had the privilege of hitting balls with Rod Laver here when the Legends Tour came through. And I guess Laver was probably about my age that I am right now. And I was, almost 29, 30 years younger than I am now. And on half the court, I mean, his ball just still. And I think he was ready to have hip surgery shortly after. But, it was more of a drive. It penetrated and it had weight on it. And Billy said that in his opinion, Rosewall's was even better than Laver's. So I think today it seems like, you look at Tiafoe, all these players, possess an underspin backhand, but, I think they're just within the pro game only, there seems to be certain levels of competency on it, but they've all got it dialed in enough to where it's not a huge liability relative to what they use it for. I'd say in the junior game, 8, 9 out of 10 kids, it's a huge liability because of technical lack of understanding, from the grip to the swing to the reality of how the racket face is supposed to be at impact.
Here's just a couple quick thoughts on slice. Just juniors watching juniors, college players watching college players, the parents. It is absolutely almost a sure thing. When one kid hits slice, the other kid hits slice. And I think Jacobson did that so well. There's a plus, a minus, an IP. So a kid, I shout out to Dave Squire. I love to remember things, so I make it a story. So I always tease, say Dave Squire, the dumbest Australian on the planet. But I heard him say, well, you hit to a kid, he said, you hit float slice. You don't hit drive slice. And that is so well put. And most kids, they could just float it. So when a kid does float it and the other kid says, well, I'll hack away too. And they just both are just doing nothing. So the one kid hits a minus, their recognition skill should be to hit a plus. But actually just to throw in an underspin backhand tool of variety, most kids are going to give you a free point because what they're going to do is, even with a really efficient swing, they're going to be early and miss long if you just throw in a slice. But that's just like the overhead. I think what Andre said, count and practice. But months will go by and people only, for the most part, hit their float, wounded, sloppy, slice backhand when it's not on their terms. They're just out of position and it's a last resort. It's the only thing they can do.
Dave's story brought back memories of like 20 years ago, I went off and played with Jaime Fiol. He was getting ready to play the U.S. Open Senior event, and I played in college with his son, and he called me up to go play in Key Biscayne, and he just wanted to do half court hitting cross court, and every slice backhand, I'm telling you, was a foot from the baseline. It was like something I'd never seen before, and he must have been 57 years old at that time. And here I am struggling to even stay in a rally. So it was incredible what I saw then. And so, yeah, I mean, and I'm sure some of Rosewell's was better. I'm sure there were a lot of guys that might have had a little bit better. But I mean, it just seemed like so many guys back then had that shot in their arsenal that they.
Well, here's something.
Let me ask you a question that you guys can answer. It's just a fun question, but if Steffi Graf had hit the majority of her backhands with top, do you think she would have been better in terms of just her record? Do you think she would have had a record that was as dominant, or do you think it would have suffered as a result of actually hitting top?
Actually, in last week's podcast, Jim Rogers, he was in Finland. He coached a Finnish girl that played Steffi. It's so funny. We had some problems with sound, but we have to go through that and edit that. But anyway, with Jim, so a girl he's working with is going to play Steffi Graf, and she says, "What should I do?" And he goes, "I don't know." I don't know. But that's a trick question with juniors. What's better, top spin or underspin? And the answer is which one lands deeper. But she could hit top when someone was passing against her, or when she was forced to pass when they were approaching.
Yeah, I think she would have been. Her slice backhand was just so, and honestly, I think it would be more of a. In today's game, I think they would give a lot more women a lot more trouble nowadays than even back then.
Yeah.
I feel like, but even let's say, look at her. We're talking about the whole GOAT discussion. She retired at 29.
Yeah,
she had a few extra years, to sort of go out there and play if she had wanted to. So
I think greatest of all time. You can go shot by shot or category. This girl from Poland, Iga Swiatek. I mean, to me, she has Graf-like mobility. So Serena, the greatest of all time. I mean, I don't think that she was the tennis player overall. If you had a checklist, Martina's going to get more checks. But when you have a serve like that and the way the game is played, you're going to win every other game. I mean, she had such a great serve. Not to take anything away from her, but she was not, her skills were not as refined as Nurmagomedov's. So again, to have the perfect player, it's a matter of, okay, we'll take this forehand and this backhand.
I remember being a kid and the World Tennis magazine came out with a greatest of all time discussion where they basically got 16 men and 16 women, and they just basically, placed people. They seeded 4, and then they put everybody else randomly, and they made a draw, and they made a discussion of all the matchups. I wish I could remember who won in that draw, but I can almost assure you that the person who won in that draw is no longer mentioned in today's discussion about greatest of all time.
Well, the young people today, I mean, say, well, they may not even remember Agassi. To hear the name Jaime Fiol, here's a funny story about Jaime Fiol. I was told this, is that he was just, tall, good-looking movie star. And when he would walk into a stadium, it was just biological. Somebody said, watch how the women just stare at this guy. But Jaime Fiol, Brian Wilson. Did you ever work with Brian Wilson? Not the guy from the Beach Boys, but yeah, he played.
He played with Stolt in 18 indoors. They won it here. Yeah, I didn't spend much time around him. I did with Stolt, but I knew Brian. I watched him play. Yeah,
Craig Tiley, who was a classmate of yours, he came to work with us, and he was around Florida, around us for several tournaments. But I remember saying, "Hey, let's watch this McEnroe match, '84, the French with Lendl." He was up 2-0 and lost. And I remember Brian said, which was a very good comment on his part, can we watch the Henman match? I said, yeah, I've got that. We can watch Henman play on the red clay. But I said, well, do you think McEnroe could have made this is Illinois tennis. I think it was 2003. They won the NCAAs. They had Ryler DeHart. He won 30 matches for him, but I think quarters, semis, and finals, he didn't play. He was 7. But if he had played 6, they would have had all one-handers playing. But a kid named Martin played.
Chris Martin.
Chris Martin, yeah. And
He
David's
clinched
brother.
the match.
Yeah,
clinched the match on a line call
against Vanderbilt. But he actually came in. But he, that was just an interesting call, and it was a smart call because he won the big match. But he did go forward at some key times in that match. But with to hear names from the past. But with Brian, I said, well, let's think about this. So, I mean, with McEnroe at age 40 made the Illinois lineup. And, just to put things in perspective and then it's amazing how longevity with the greatest players of all time. You mentioned Rosewall in 54, Rosewall gets to the Wimbledon final. 74, he gets to the Wimbledon final. He plays Jimmy Connors in 74. Connors didn't go to 94, but he went to 91 where he's knocking on the door to get to a major final. We went all the way to the semis at the US Open and lost to Courier. There's just 2 players with almost a 40-year span. And also, too, I think with Rosewall, you mentioned him playing VJ arbitrage. A lot of highly educated Indians are here because there's so many jobs, IT jobs. So I know I was in Dallas one time and went to do a clinic for one of the coaches that you've trained, and there was 24 people allowed in the clinic, and there was 24 Indian kids. And I ask Indian kids, have you ever heard of VJ arbitrage? And they look at me, they go, no. And I go, get on YouTube. I mean, there are some positive things about YouTube. He may be, and his son does a fantastic job on the Tennis Channel. VJ may be the best storyteller ever, but he was being coached by Gonzalez. So the juniors hear these names. I mean, look up Gonzalez's serve on YouTube. And VJ arbitrage was young. He already had a win over Laver, and he's playing Rosewall. And Pancho Gonzalez is emphatic. He does not hit a slice backhand. It's as flat as a pancake. He just drives it. And so anyway, arbitrage was told not to serve to his backhand, and he's on center court, caught in the moment. And I don't know if it's the 3rd or 4th time. I would guess 3rd. And Gonzalez leaves the stadium. He leaves the grounds. He leaves his hotel. He leaves the country. And arbitrage, he couldn't get a hold of him, and it was certainly long before cell phones. And he goes to Las Vegas, and that's where Pancho was coaching at the time, Caesar's Palace. And even he tells the story much better than I do, but with Gonzalez wouldn't speak to him. And it was the 3rd day. And then he just tore into and just started swearing. He said, I told you, body or forehand, don't serve to his backhand. But yeah, the famous slice, we're trying to get kids not to have the grip on Continental. The Continental grip opens racket face 45. We just go to the right side of one. We're just talking about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. And I think we could touch upon that is not only with what we're trying to stand for, having studied all these different systems, kids are really misinformed on how to hit a slice, and especially in the early age groups. Okay, you're not necessarily going to do this in a drill format, a competitive drill format, or a competitive play, but every day you have to work on the one-handed low backhand volley. You got to be doing that when you're 8 years old.
It's crazy when I'm thinking about going back to Jaime Fiol. His grandson now is doing quite well on tour. Nico Jari's got to be on the top 25, close to it. So
he had a good couple of weeks, didn't he?
Yeah, and basically, I was in Chile at their house when he was about a year old, and he was grabbing a oversized racket with 2 hands in the garage and just like swatting balls in the garage. It was incredible, like watching him, not in the air. Obviously, it was just the balls on the ground. He was just smacking it, but you almost knew based on the size of his father that it was going to be a big kid. But it's kind of cool watching him now, 20 some odd years later.
I like his mentality. He seems to have a great mentality.
Yeah, he's a very, very grounded, and then it was very cool for me to see the tournament in Chile. because the tournament is owned by his grandfather and the brother. And every match that he was winning, he was getting interviewed on court by his uncle, which was my college teammate. So it was kind of cool watching all that, knowing all the backstory. We were always texting on our college chat. So it's great. So, I mean, I've got a guy that I'm definitely cheering for at all the slams.
Andres, did you know the Almeidas?
I did not.
I was wondering if you ran into them from down there.
No.
Tell us a little bit about the Almeidas.
Well, I may be off here, but I thought Alex was from Chile. But his son worked here for many years. But I always think the father, Alex Almeida Sr., I think it's just it's a kind of a Brad Gilbert, Michael Pernfors kind of story in that, he had to go in the back door and went to a JUCO for 2 years and won NJCAAs. He won it out in California where they had the separate system, and then ended up winning the NCAAs 2 years at USC. And then, had a brilliant pro career where he, 1 year I believe he won 2 slams and was in the finals of 3. But, I love those stories like that where those guys had to climb in, from the back of the room and work their way up. But I'm having a little bit of a brain cramp, and he may not have been from Chile. It may have been from Peru.
Yeah, it sounds a little more. I think that's right, because I think I heard during the French Open when I saw the Juan Pablo Varillas match, I think they mentioned all the great Peruvians, and they mentioned Orna.
Yeah, I think he may be from Peru.
They mentioned Orna. They mentioned. And they did not mention Pablo Raya, but they did mention I think how Almeida would have been Peruvian, but I guess he got naturalized and played the slams as an American.
I can't chime in. I would think Almeida was Peruvian, but he ended up in California at the Beverly Hills Tennis Club, and he taught a lot of the famous movie stars. That's what I would pull out of my hat. But when Andres mentioned Jaime Fio and then the youngster hitting the balls in the garage, I think one very important point for young players, parents, and teaching pros, the idea there's no substitute for a good beginning. Well, a lot of people don't have a good beginning. Daniel Coyle, the Russian formula, one of the segments of the 4 is to have an early start. Well, not everybody has an early start. I've met so many kids, now numbered decades. Late start, bad start. They started playing late and they weren't taught very well. But the biggest thing is that when you're really a tiny tyke hitting tennis balls, you can't hit the ball hard. It's just, you just can't hit the ball hard. These kids that are 5, 6 years old playing. So there are a lot of great tennis players that are born into the game. And I think parents just have to stop and think, okay, my kid wants to be a great tennis player. Doesn't necessarily mean that they can't have teenage success. We always telling people the best path to take is that of a late bloomer. But this young kid, Alcaraz, he's just so loose in the shoulders. He just lets that racket free fall. I know Andy Fissell, all the years he was at Indian Wells with Vic Braden, and he has all sorts of film where they're filming from the ground up, and how they just are, the pros are so loose. Like Dimitrov was playing Alcaraz the other day, and Dimitrov, on both sides, he's got more plays. He's more horizontal on both sides than Alcaraz is more vertical. And as a result, he makes less errors. But people, and I think that, the comments you made, Dave, in the beginning on Federer, I could see Alcaraz, he's already there. I mean, with the type of tennis he's displaying, just like the grips, the shape of his swings, he's so, so good. I mean, he has solid fundamentals. He has a great base. But I just don't think that people realize how important it is to be loose. And the kids who have just the opposite of a late start and a bad start, the kids who start really early. And of course, years ago, kids weren't, the racket that kid would get years ago, people would just give him a wooden racket that was cut off. And, now you walk into a nice pro shop, and there's that life-size poster. It was Sampras for a long time, and now it's Federer. Maybe it's someone else now, Djokovic. and the companies are selling the kids a new racket. Like there's, 15 inches, 16, 17, just goes all the way up. And there's no, hey kid, here's an old wooden racket, hasn't been strung since your grandmother played, and go and start knocking some balls around. And they start playing before the USTA, and it really came from Belgium first, before there was such an emphasis on short court tennis. I always said that was an insult to old coaches, because old coaches would just have kids play mini tennis. And the rule is very simple. Okay, we're going to play with an old ball. It's going to be a regular tennis ball. And the rule is you can't hit the ball hard. And you hit the ball hard, you lose the point. And there's so many things from the past, and that's obviously what we're trying to do with this podcast is carry a torch on, what was offered before to tennis people, and perhaps it's just not forgotten, but pretty close to being totally forgotten.
That is for sure.
It's unfortunate now that with all these slams coming up, and I ask the kids, did anybody watch the tennis? And I think they're starting to watch now, because I'm making them feel guilty. But I'm going to start with making them watch Breakpoint and the Netflix series. And I cannot believe that with the matches that Alcaraz played at the U.S. Open, that there's basically like 10 seconds of Alcaraz in that second part that just came out. It's a shame, because, I mean, literally that was the talk of the tournament, the Alcaraz Sinner match, the Alcaraz. They did talk about the Alcaraz Tiafoe match, but very little on, and again, these are guys, or these are people, well, maybe not Netflix, but tennis commentators definitely have a responsibility, or should have, to try to grow the game and try to grow the interest. Hopefully Netflix does for tennis what they did for Formula One with their special, but left me with a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth watching that.
I'll tell you one thing about Alcaraz. The guy has fun with watching the match, just like everybody else comes into your living room, and he ended up winning the match, but he had match points. He had several match points. And then he didn't win that game, and it came back around again, and he had several match points. And they went to his father in the stands. And when he lost another match point, his father was laughing. But I think that kid, probably the best lesson, if I were to say, well, what do you think? That kid enjoys tennis. Win or lose, that guy loves the game. And but his tennis game, unfortunately, I don't think that people that are even in positions where they're making a very good living teaching tennis, they can see how he plays. Just grip, swing, body, toss, whatever, all the basics. And I say that and I get in trouble, but to be critical is all you have to do. Andy Fitzell says it all the time about tennis teachers. Well, let's watch their kids hit the ball. Just let's watch how their kids hit the ball. But go ahead. I think I interrupted you. What do you got?
No, Alcaraz to me could really help everything. And, I film off of the TV basically, and then download all of his mechanics onto, the app that I use to do side by side, because the bottom line is the guy's swinging at ballistic speed, and nobody really sees that. Like he said, that's the great base. And, naysayers are going to take a shot and look at the inverted racket at the beginning and not understand, well, yeah, you take the racket out of his hand, look what his body parts are doing. Look at the thrust that his lower body has. And he just exemplifies so many of the things we're trying to get people to do all day. And, but with what Andre said too, I mentioned this to some visiting parents that arrived today, and we were on the court, and I said, you got to make sure that you maintain this attitude with your kid that allows them to remember tennis as a sport. And even if we share all the knowledge and maybe the science behind it, that it's got to be a sport. They have to have a sporting attitude. And to me, when you watch Alcaraz, his passion's just oozing out of his pores. And I think when you have that type of, zeal that in a player. It's just so much fun to see whether they go on to reach his level or not. And I think that, if I look at my life on the courts, I feel like it's getting not as prevalent to see that kind of thing. I don't think Andres mentioned, looking through World Team Tennis or listening to Tony Travert, or when, we had 3 channels, running up the stairs to make first claim on the TV to watch Breakfast at Wimbledon on NBC. And, those kind of things don't seem to be happening. I think kids aren't sometimes as passionate about the sport. And as a result, we're going to have struggles to get them to where they want to go. You got to have that childlike zeal, I think, when you're pursuing your goals, no matter what it is. It helps you get out of bed in the morning. And the kids visiting today, and a couple of the kids that are here full time, we're all on the court, and I started telling a story about Borg, and I said, "Who can tell me about Borg?" And none of them knew who he was, which is kind of concerning. If you love something, you study it a little bit. Kids playing and in high school basketball that dream about, playing at Duke and maybe into the NBA, they know about Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and they can go back in the history of the sport a little bit more than I think the average tennis kid can today.
Oh, those are very good points. Harold Solomon was here. He was 5'6" in the world, a small guy, but he just told the story that 3 times a week, and his father was a club player, they hit 1,000 balls in a row. So that means you get done 999, and you gotta quit. And back in the old days, it's like, okay, I'm gonna go hit 1,000 balls in a row. This guy just told me this is what he did when he was younger. Just get a court and say, okay, let's just rally. But I do think the influence of, like the first 4 shots. We mentioned Craig O'Shaughnessy before, and he's brought a lot to tennis, and there's lots of positives, but kids just need to be able to rally, just get the legs, and just again, things we repeat all the time. Jim Lair, tennis is your drug, and you just can't wait to hit balls, and this is fun. It's not boring. I wanted to go back to one thing that you mentioned with the video work. I know it wasn't that long ago that I was at your place, and it was Denis Shapovalov, and you just you just filmed off your phone, and then you just showed the key part where how's the racket falling below the ball? Does the racket get away from his body? Does it track out towards its target? I think one of the biggest problems of all right now on the forehand side is that people don't get past the forehand. And it's like the follow through is not even taught anymore. The follow through doesn't exist. It's just recovery. And it's just how people are teaching the forehand. But yeah, to actually slow it down and say, okay, let me show you what the pros do. They don't violate physical laws. And the best players have the best fundamentals for the most part. And again, coming back to Alcaraz.
Yeah, you could check a lot of boxes looking at him.
I want to throw this out, the tabletop approach shot, and we can get back to, people will say, oh, you guys old school, what you guys are teaching is all wrong. But that ties into the unit turn, setting up for, can you hit a drop shot? Can you steal the ace, taking a return, like a volley then a follow through? Can you play a conventional approach volley? Why do you think, and I know you've said it before, why we have lost arts? Why are certain aspects of the game going away?
Andres, if you want to answer first, feel free.
All right. So what shocks me is when you see a certain player that refuses, let's say, to hit that on the return, and they're basically game planning to win the match by the other player having an off day versus their ability to sort of induce a mistake or put themselves in position to put a winner. So that's the part to me that always, we talked about Cressy earlier, you do see him randomly try to come under it and get into the net, why doesn't he do it more? I mean, there's no way the stats are telling him that he's winning 51% or greater of the baseline rallies. So why allow himself to get gassed and potentially affect his return, his service game? So why don't we see it? I just feel like there's way too many people that are just taught the same way. And they basically, I think you mentioned it earlier, which is actually a great thing that I hadn't heard of, the peer pressure. You know, they basically are comparing themselves to somebody else, and they want to sort of reach that type of level versus figuring out a level that could help them win that match. But, you know, I've really thought hard trying to think of the last player that I can think of that even resembled anything of, let's say, of a tabletop on the backhand like Connors. I mean, the only name I came up with was Jurgen Melzer. So, I mean, it's a lot of tennis years in between Connors and today to only come up with Jurgen Melzer. So, but they
and Melzer was top 10 in the world in singles and doubles just a few years back.
Yeah, well, Andre said that earlier. Is that we don't get to see that many players, but it's unfortunate that, you know, we really get to see on TV the marquee players, and, you know, instead of like, oh gee, at the majors, I know now at Wimbledon they're doing some different things with even younger players, but besides just having the juniors, they have the 16s, I believe it is. News, you know, let's what's going on in the doubles, with you know, it's not even being shown. That's just awful. You know?
Yeah,
it's awful. And you know, over and over again. I do think that there's too many the alphabet soup. There's too many governing bodies of tennis, but it would have been amazing years ago if there was a ranking based on a combined ranking, singles and doubles. One year here in Florida, the late Bobby Curtis, there was one weekend a month that you could only play doubles. Didn't work. People took that weekend off. And I believe the highest they went was 15%.
Right.
And that just wasn't courageous enough. That, you know, it's like having a weighted GPA. You could have an improved ranking if your doubles was higher. I do think a lot of times the people that are making decisions, especially here in the U.S., where the governing body of tennis has so many volunteers, but a lot of times people making decisions haven't been in the trenches, and they don't know what it takes to develop tennis players. And then I
think how the system. I think there's got to be a huge critical awareness by the people that are on the boards. I was speaking to one who is currently in the competitive board situation here at the USTA of Texas, but they got to realize the impact that these decisions on systems related to ranking, et cetera, have on development. They actually have a huge effect on it. Because I can tell you with certainty that in Texas, back when you were here, Steve, and it was just a better system. And merely because you really had the primary tournaments that were just once a month. In Florida, they used to call them designated. I think when we were there, that the top ones would go to. Here, they were major zones. And you know, to get into that super champ level, you could only do it up until June. You had January till June. And if you didn't get into that tier by then, you know, you waited 6 months and to have another attempt. And so kids were really forced to build their games. I mean, nobody wanted to stay in champs. And when these system changes, whether it's doubles, you know, being relegated to kind of just a, you know, second class citizen sport in terms of how it's given the credit it needs from the top down, in my opinion. I think all that stuff has a tremendous impact on why we don't see the skill sets. Obviously, the tennis teaching too. I mean, people have to, you know, realize. I mean, I think of Kafelnikov. He didn't hit a pure tabletop, you know, but again, a guy who I think was one of the last players to hold number one ranking in the world in singles and doubles. And, you know, you look at Kyrgios hit a backhand, he can take his two-handed return and just literally just line it up and just go in behind it. He doesn't do it all the time. Think of Andy Roddick at the tail end of his career, how he tried to, especially in the deuce court, start taking the two-hander, and I think Courier would call it crush and rush. But you just think if at 12, 13, if they had just continued the path with doubles. But what happens, when a kid's starting to show promise at a young age, it's like immediately the thing that's taken off the plate is doubles, and it ends up being a very tough decision to look at 10 years later, because some of the skill sets, who knows, right? If Broddick doesn't miss that high backhand volley at Wimbledon, he gets better. Maybe if he had a little more mile in making that kind of move, that he would be hoisting that trophy over his head. You don't know. You can't say for certain, but I can tell you for certain it wouldn't have hurt.
Kafelnikov, go back to that name. I worked with a Russian coach from Sochi. If he won 6-1, he had to run a mile. 6-2, 2 miles. 6-3, 3 miles. 6-4, 4 miles. So the guy wins a tiebreaker 7-6. He's got to run 6 miles. I think that might promote some bad calls, but just to go out and go, every ball is important, every point's important. I think we touched upon that in junior tennis. We do 2Z, 4Zs. We do a number of different things. One player has to win 2 points to win the game. The other player has to win 4. So basically, you're starting down love 30, where you can handicap it. Tell us again, in Texas, though, I think from football, the highest level was super champ, then it was champ, and then it was regular. And they used to call it that, yeah. I used to have a problem with one kid would say to the other kid, "You super?" "Yeah, I'm super. I souped up." But how does it work now? But there were some positives to that, wasn't there? That you had to climb the ladder and you couldn't play in the super championship events until you played so many in the.
And you could only you started at Zats, which you primarily played, in your kind of local area. So, it did something that isn't that readily available now here. I mean, it is kind of, but not the same. And then once a kid accumulated enough points in that first entry level tier, they'd go into the champs category, and those started to be held throughout the entire state, which, Texas, for the most part, is its own section. There's a few areas in Texas that are part of the other sections, what was the Southwest and then Southern. And then, you had 6 months once you got into champs. You had January through June, and you would try to amass enough points. Basically, you had to win one or make the finals of 2, and then you get enough points to go into super champ. And the draws were much different then. I mean, there weren't from the get-go. It was smaller draws, and they were more competitive, but everybody had a fighting chance. And then they opened the floodgates, and people could kind of qualify year round, and I can just kind of pinpoint these eras where things started to go backward. As we went forward, they just started to move backward, and now you just have so many kids out there that, really have no clue on their game, or they have really no chance in tennis, and the parents think that it's mental. They're lacking, mental, or they need match play, and they're serving with a semi-Western grip. Forget hitting a forehand with one. I mean, whether that debate, they're serving with forehand or semi-Western forehand grips, and they're hitting backhands, and their dominant hand is on essentially a semi-Western forehand grip, and they have no chance. But they're in the system, and I think the system's got to really, people running the systems have to. There's a lot of implications on things, decisions that are made. I've served on the boards for many years. I felt like it was a moot point because I felt like my voice wasn't heard ever. And, with anything, and I think once I kind of get that sense that I'm not going to have an impact on anything, I'll just kind of wash my hands. But I did volunteer down there when I was at the sectionals to say, hey, I'd be happy to sit back on, give it another go. But I don't know.
No, we do have some, I guess I can't say call in, but some write-in questions. But going back, and you touched upon that, but back in the day with the 3 categories, so people want to get to the super champ, they stayed within their age group. They weren't jumping age group so much, right?
Yeah, in fact, we were talking about it. I mean, back when you were there, Steve, and I think Craig took a group to Wichita Falls that year when they, John Roddick and, those kind of guys were battling it out. And Andy Roddick, I don't think was even playing in 12s then. He was probably 8, 9 years old, maybe. But you had to play your own age group, and you had to, you had to play 2 major zones prior to, you had to play the major zones leading up to the clay court nationals, the hard court nationals, all that, in order to get endorsed by your section. So, it forced kids to play locally more and inside of their section more, where they weren't paying for airline and having to go from, Dallas, Texas to Sioux Falls, South Dakota to go play in L4 or something. And it's just what I'm seeing right now. I mean, I'm confused, to say the least. I think it's what's going on in the sport right now. It's not really good for the sport. I like the fact that kids can go and play in other sections and all of that. This system right now, I think we got to really take a look at it and evaluate what's going on.
Well, let's get your checkbook out.
Yeah.
It's almost like your kid has to be a homeschooler, or they. But if people take a deep look at it, the parents can figure out, okay, I'm going to have my kid become really athletic, really fit, and they're going to have great ball striking skills. And you don't have to be flying all over the country when you're playing at a young age. No,
I mean, you can let your racket do the talking for sure. I mean, look at Tam Trin, who, you've met many times and was here as a player and a coach, and he's moved on now. But I mean, he had very little. I think he had one other tournament that he played on a national level before he went up and won Kalamazoo doubles. I believe that was his second venture into a national tournament. I don't know if he had even played one of the major nationals, the Clay Hards or anything like that. I think it was just at the time called a National Open. So I may be off slightly on that, but he had very little.
No, we should have
his racket skills were good.
No, I remember, Tram. We should have a conversation sometime. But you and I were in Boca Raton, and we were scheduled to run an academy, Seguza Bassett, which is now Everett's 29 courts. And, what could have been with Karina Marariu. And I really tell people, no, I really worked with Albin. I used to chart matches on the CompuTennis, the CT 120. And then I finally convinced Albin, the story, you lived it, and said, hey, let me show you a video. And he didn't want anything to do with it. I mean, she had an amazing tennis journey where she was once a week working with Colin Dibley, who was a police officer who had a really big serve, and his buddy, Rod Laver, said, you should try the Pro Tour. And at one time, Dibley had the fastest serve in the world. So in Boca, Dibley was living there, and the lesson that Albin had set up for his daughters, just serve you for 45 minutes and then do whatever you want. And, young girls over there trying to return her serve. And with that, she had a reset swing on the backhand. It's on our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied. She took the racket low twice. She had a very good backhand overall, the grip, played from the shoulder, but she took the racket low, high, low. And, she was 28 in the world, won a Wimbledon title. But I remember finally getting Albin. I said, out to show you the film without her sparring partner, I guess traveling coach, whatever the title might be. And then without her in the room. And I remember he threw his keys down on the desk, and she was 15 and she was scheduled to go to Europe. She didn't go. She stayed and hung out and changed her backhand. But with that, a famous quote is from Alvin: no one cares who wins the weekend tournament in Miami. She only played 2 national tournaments. There's different ways up the mountain. Yeah. I mean, like say Venus Williams, Lindsay Davenport, Martina Hingis, same age group, and just the different pathways they took to get to the top. And someone who back in the day, you worked with me, John Lafdiag, you played mixed 3 years in a row with Martina Hingis, and she really when Gilbert was telling her, hey, on your serve and your overhead, throw it, it's like throwing a football. But I don't know if Brad, can get into all the technical movements on how, he himself says, I don't do grips. So I'm going to guess that he's not, and I love listening to him, but not the technician. But with, here's something, one time was at a USPTA function, and all of a sudden it turns into a round table. And so there are several round tables, and Claire Pollard, the coach at Northwestern, who's a great player in her own right. She won an NCAA doubles title and played Wimbledon, US Open. And she's won a ton at Northwestern. So she's the lead at this round table, and I'm not saying anything. And, the discussion was on how to improve college tennis. I guess it was maybe an ITA function. This is a long time ago, 20 years ago. And I didn't say anything. So she said, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd try to find a way. And I know people would break the spirit of the rule, but I'd find a way that each college team had to develop a player that lived within a 25-mile radius of the facility. In other words, in their lineup, some people say, well, this kid moved here. But no, there's got to be some kid. And basically what I'm saying is that, and it can be done, that every college and every university should have a junior development program. And if there was if there was a rule, and it'd be tough to regulate, to enforce that rule, because college coaches are just recruiting. They don't have any skin in the game as far as, we don't have anybody, from our surrounding area, let alone even from our state. So that was kind of I didn't say that to make it have it be a knee-jerk reaction, but there's just so many things. Like now, you're still out there trying to run a program, and the individual becomes bigger than the program. Now, like when you came to Texas back in the mid '80s, high school tennis was huge.
Yeah. It's everybody kind of wants. I think I said it. Gen Pop isn't that appealing to people. Everybody wants to kind of feel they have this unique formula that they think is going to work for their child, and you can dress everything up any way you want, but at the end of the day, I think that you got to work. And like I said, I think that people are trying to find ways to do things without work, and there's just no substitute. The parents are going to have to grind a little, the kids are going to have to grind a lot, and the coaches are going to have to grind. And when everybody accepts that, I think you can swallow some of the adjustments you may have to make in your game technically, or some of the things better. And I think that there's got to be that attitude. The junior part of it is funny, though. You talk about that you mentioned Brian Wilson, and my memory of him. Obviously, he was so talented, and he beat Stolt in the 18 indoors, and then he and Stolt won the doubles. But I remember his serve. He was essentially like when Djokovic's was so far off. Wilson's was even further with the severe palm up, stiff arm, almost cricket throwing motion. And then, had he not landed on the doorstep of Tylee's program and been able to make adjustments and ran into people like you, somebody like you who could help him further that technical flaw, he would have played all 4 years in college with very little adjustment in the same serve.
Oh, he was very athletic. Stories. Wilson, he was playing with a guy named Jeff Lasky. I could just even tell you the tennis facility. They were young, and they won their first futures. And they were playing against a team that was playing one up, one back. And I watched the first 4 games, and I went into the clubhouse. I said, I'm not watching this. And I'm driving them to the tournament. And they're young guys, and they're all excited. I'm trying to think. I went in, and it was Guga was playing the young American who played at Miami. He's coaching now. Michael Russell. And went 5 sets. So those guys come off, they're all excited. Say, guys, we're not leaving. We got to watch this. And they wanted to go to I had this house with a pool. You play basketball, and I had Haz Iswan from Malaysia. He was with me, and I said, "Hey, we're going to stop at Subway. You sit on the same side of the table," and so we're just asking these guys questions. So with Wilson, and it's tough to be a young guy. They don't make any money. I said, Wilson, here's the deal. I said, I'll give you a choice. I said, you can stay another night. We put you up. We'll feed you, or we can just take you to the airport now. What do you want to do? And that means you'd have to change flights. And, I was going to be in the SOB, and he's just a young kid. And so he said, no, I'll stay, and I won't change my flight. And I said, well, then this is what you have to do. Instead of going to the pool, and we're going to go to the tennis facility, and I know we have 8 baskets of balls. I've got some computer work to do, some phone calls to do, and you're going to technically by yourself this is what you're going to do with the 8 baskets of balls. I would have to ask him if he remembers that, because he had a forehand grip on his serve. I mean, he had a little tap. He certainly did a very good job with ball striking skills, among other things. But go ahead.
When you mentioned the junior development program at college programs, reminded me of when I was in college. We had our volunteer assistant who would use the courts there with a couple of young juniors that were quite good. They were probably one of the top players in the country, and they ended up going to Texas A&M. Both of them. They went to Sean Madden and Rafael de Mesa, and I ran into Sean yesterday. We were playing some tennis. He was in town, and it was funny, like how nearly 30 years later, he still remembers all the guys from the team because he was always out there either watching or trying to hit with or anything. And literally like a year or so later, Dave here mentioned Mike Russell. I remember when Mike arrived at UM with Ivan Rodrigo, and it was just like the 2 best freshmen in the country. I mean, they were both phenomenal. So it was just crazy now that you mentioned these names, and it kind of all comes to my mind.
Well, here's a write-in, 2 things. We'll come to the UTR last, but rackets, I'm the last person to be asked a question about rackets. I mean, it's important to me, the size of the grip, but that's one thing today is that people are using a smaller grip. And I mean, think back in the day when Borg wanted to volley better, Berglund had him use a slightly bigger grip just to stabilize that racket in your hand and not be so wristy. Braden used to be asked, about rackets, and he'd say, you like blue? Buy blue. You like red? Buy red. And the rackets, engineered beyond man's ability to play. I would say this, now juniors could pick up on Medvedev, who I think Andres, like Cressy, is many times going for two big serves. It's like Rod Laver said, if you can't get 1 out of 2 in, you don't deserve to win the point. But Medvedev will take 2 rackets to the other side. He's going to return with 1 racket and serve with the other because of the tensions of the racket. And, juniors may ask me about that, and I look at them, I go, you don't need to be paying attention to that. The way you're hanging on to the racket, how you're maneuvering the racket. So I am wrong to downplay. I mean, I do think that, as far as injury prevention, it's very important what racket they use. But why do you guys comment on rackets?
Yeah, man, I think rackets have pretty much been the same for the better part of 30 years. Obviously, Babolat came out with the Pure Drive, and you had a lot of people that were talking about how powerful that was. But, the Prestige has been around probably since 85, I would say. So I'm not sure the rackets have changed that much. I guess they add some new materials every year. I would say that customization is much better. I mean, let's say with companies like Priority One or Bosworth and these guys, that they can make every racket the exact same and, make slight improvements as far as adding foam to the grip. But people talk about when you listen to TV and you hear them talk about why players don't come to the net, and they're like, well, the rackets and the string it's been the same rackets and strings for a long time now. I mean, Guga basically was the one that brought out, the Luxilon or Kirschbaum string initially in '97. That's what, more than 25 years ago. So I mean, it's a little lazy just to keep using the same excuse, rackets and strings, when it comes to why certain players can't do certain things.
Yeah, I lean to Braden's kind of line of thinking on that. I definitely think string tension, and like you said, Steve, preventing injury and keeping a player healthy and all that. But that one of my favorite books, I think you read it, Steve, when you were here, one of your stays. It's just that book Battle I put out on the world of Rafa Nadal, and it tells all of these brief stories, and then they have a lesson basically from it. And the one story that sticks out in my mind is when Babolat had flown to Mallorca to meet with Moya when Moya was one in the world, and so Rafa was a hitting partner for him. Moya was going to test drive all the new Babolat equipment and strings, etc. And the Babolat people came over to Uncle Tony and said, "Hey, since we're here, Rafa can take advantage of testing all the latest string and some of the new rackets." And this, according to this book, Uncle Tony looked at it and said, "Thank you, but I don't want Rafa thinking his game has anything to do with that right now. We have too many things to work on." And I think it's just the opposite now. It's like I said, I think everybody's looking for these shortcuts that really don't exist. And we're very, it's the old Barnum and Bailey, like you always say, sucker born every minute. Everybody's selling something, and, many, many things taste a lot better to people than just the hard concept of you're going to have to really work harder than you probably ever worked. And, you're going to have to suffer a little, you're going to have to struggle a little, and you're going to have to sacrifice a lot in order to get down the road. And regardless of what equipment.
Probably the best thing I could offer with equipment is that if kids were to get a part-time job and have to buy the rackets, they were going to rake leaves or scrape shutters, mow lawns, pull weeds. 100 years ago, Mark Hamlin, we grew up together. We went to watch the movie. There's been a remake since, Bad News Bears. And we came out, and Mark, we grew up playing ice hockey, and there was a little kid, Johnny, and said, "Hey, coach." And he came over, and the father said, "Hey, what do we need to do for next year?" And Hamlin was a great line, which he had heard, just growing up in hockey back in the day. He said, "Have your son get all sorts of part-time jobs and make him buy his own skates, because kids, they can they can borrow equipment, and it's actually, to have old equipment is even better. You use hand-me-downs, but you want to get your own skates and new skates. And kids, their feet grow so fast when they're growing up, is that it's like every year they got to get new skates." And I'd be hard pressed to stop and think, how many tennis players can I name that have had part-time jobs and had to help pay for, equipment or entry fees? With
short list.
You mentioned Moya. Karecha is a little bit older. I have to ask the fact checker, how many years between them?
Well, Moya's my age, so Moya's 76. So I think Karecha is 74. So
it was close. But anytime, I just read an article one time where Moya got a chance to hit with Karecha, and Karecha said, "Come on up and hit some volleys," and he refused to hit volleys. So, he at one time was ranked 1 in the world, correct, Moya?
Mm-hmm.
And but that stubbornness, to have stubbornness work for you, I think that's a very important point. But let's turn to another question. UTR was asked. Coach says it's tough talking to parents about the UTR. He thinks it's pretty easy to become a 7. What do you have to do to become a 9? That would be one answer. Then what do you have to do to get from a 9 to 11, 12, which are obviously different levels of play. What comes to your mind with UTR and talking to parents about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is going back to what Dave was mentioning about the tournaments and how everything has become so confusing. And basically, I've thought for a long time that at least down here in Florida, that the points table was poorly done, in the sense that, well, back then it was like a level 7. I guess now a level 7 is a level 6. But basically, you could win, or let's say you get to the semis of the tournament, you weren't getting very many points compared to going to a bigger tournament and winning a consolation match. And I don't know, like Dave, when it all started falling apart. But I do think that UTR was part of the reason why it fell apart, because now you started getting people pulling out of the back draws, not wanting to play a certain match, not wanting to risk a loss.
Yeah, I think that definitely accelerated it. Yeah.
And then, now at least down here, I see just a lot of kids that don't even see. I mean, I haven't been to too many of the junior ones, but just the Battle of Bocas the draws are so big every single weekend. It's just full of a lot of juniors.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to imagine that all the L3s, L4s, L5s that we used to know before, that they're just heavily diluted. So basically, and then there's an issue when it comes to the UTR, that kids are affected by the kids that they're playing in the tournament. So that's part of the algorithm that, it's almost a benefit to you to play better or highly ranked players. And the kids all seem to know all the tricks of the trade. They know that it's 6 or 7 games that they have to win. And I remember running tournaments and having parents call me, no, it wasn't 3-3, it was 3-4, because they all knew all the tricks of the trade. So, but to your question, as far as what's the difference between a 7 or a 9, I would just basically say a lot of that to me is going back to what Dave was mentioning about consistency and being able to repeat targets and stay involved in rallies. But as you move up the ladder, I would definitely say it's much more serve dependent. I mean, it's hard to be an 11, let's say, without a serve. I mean, it's really hard for me to imagine a junior player getting to that level with a mediocre serve.
Yeah, and there's a decent crop of boys here in the 14s that are training daily, and some working better than others. And one of them, I kind of said, don't go to this national team event in Mobile. I said, you just got too many things to work on. I said, but there's a local tournament. Go out and just play at a local UTR tournament, where you could play a 40-year-old man or anybody. And so he went out and played 2 matches here about 10 minutes from his house, and played a few 10-5 UTR players. And these kids went off to the 14s and, we're playing the best in the nation. But, anywhere from 9-5 to 10 UTRs. And on paper, they're, all having similar experiences in terms of building their UTR points, I guess, if that's your goal. But, the one player, it cost him gas money to get, a few miles from his house and come back and forth for 2 days. The others, it ended up costing, my guess is somewhere around $3,000 for the 5 days. So, I mean, to me, there's just so much money being spent on these things. And now, I don't see an end to it. I just think it's going and going and going. And I have a coach here that played junior Wimbledon, and he's a heck of a guy, and he's on a path at 23, 24 still, with the dream of playing professional tennis. And I'm going to try to help him do everything I can. And very good player, working on his game hard. And but he spoke to the kids the other day, and he just said he just wished he would have flushed all that junior stuff down the drain looking back at it, because, in college and beyond, nobody's ever stepped up and asked him, hey, what was your ranking in juniors? Did you play junior Grand Slams? Did you do any of this and that? And he said he just had no idea when he was in the middle of it. So I think whether it's the new, worldwide ranking system, the UTR, the national system, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the biggest way to improve those things is build a game that's going to start winning tennis matches. And I mean, living in South Florida or living in a city like Dallas-Fort Worth, it's not like there's a very difficult assignment to get out and get practice matches that are really competent and challenging at any level, above, at, or below you. And I just don't understand it. I really don't get why people have to pay entry fee to stimulate the intensity state that they need to be bringing on a practice court anyways, or that's a whole nother problem in itself. So again, to me, I get a little frustrated with it, a little confused by it. And I do understand it from a parent's perspective, though. I mean, it's everybody wants to see their kids playing the game, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it's I went to an L6 last week, and it'd been a long time since I'd gone to an L6 tournament. And first thing that shocked me was that the tournament was only sanctioned for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, when it used to always be Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But to make matters worse, obviously the main draw matches are 2 sets if you split a match tiebreaker. But the consolation, they did get a little rain on Sunday morning, but the consolation was best of 3 tiebreakers.
Wow.
And and I'm looking at the draw because I wanted to see how is this possible. Like that's how I saw that it was only sanctioned 2 days, and I'm seeing that the entry fee is $83. So how is it that we're just killing tennis, like shooting ourselves in the foot every single day here with this? I mean, we were talking about doubles earlier. At what point in history did total Grand Slams won get eliminated from the discussion? Was it only with Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic? Because I remember when Martina was, trying to win 20 Grand Slams at Wimbledon, that was a big thing, trying to top Billie Jean King. I remember when, a guy like McEnroe was playing singles, doubles, even in his later age. I mean, he got 92, he got to the semis of Wimbledon in singles, won the doubles with Steek. I don't think he played mixed. I mean, I think he tried to play mixed years later with Graf, but it might not have happened. But
or he did play with Graf at one point,
or she pulled out because
pulled out.
But basically, at what point did we lose that? And then with the, I was just now coming from a former student's house, spent the afternoon there with David Grossman, who's now very involved with Major League Pickleball. And then I saw a commercial or I saw an ad on YouTube the other day for paddle. And I saw Wayne Boych, who was a phenomenal junior player, a couple years older than I was. He's very big in promoting paddle. I mean, these are 2 sports that are very doubles, heavily involved with doubles. Why are we the only sport that is trying to completely, let's say, usher it out? And I understand that top stars don't play it, but why not? I mean, it happens at other times in the year, right? It happens at Indian Wells. It happens at certain tournaments a year where the big names play doubles. I just don't see. We're adding days to the slams now. Slams are 15-day events. It doesn't seem all that crazy. I mean, maybe start a couple days early, give players a little bit more time to play doubles. But it just seems crazy what we're doing to the sport at a professional level and a junior level. I mean,
we're whittling out a key part of the history of the sport.
But I mean, I'm just the best of 3 tiebreakers. I mean, it was.
I've never heard that.
I mean, I don't even want to mention the location, but let's put it this way: it takes longer to drive over the bridge than it does to play 3 tiebreaks, or best of 3 tiebreaks. So I mean, the poor girl probably lost in 10 minutes. It takes 20 minutes to drive over that bridge. So yeah, it was sad. I mean, it was just sad, and it just sad seeing the people that are running the tournaments. It just seems like most of them don't, want to get out of there, want to just make it in and out as quick as possible. So it's pretty sad to see.
Money grab, money grab. Yeah, I think
but you mentioned before the money, or mentioned like the entry fees at the battle, but at least a percentage of that money is geared towards prize money. There's nothing being given back at these junior events to justify an $83 entry. And this is on the lower end. I mean, they're going to be, the level 5s and above, they're even more. So, it's just, back in the day when you at least promised kids best of 3 set matches, you can go out there and kind of guarantee yourself 6 hours or 6 sets minimum of tennis or whatever, 4 to 6 sets, like you used to say, like doubles would be randomly like an extra $5 for a can of balls. I mean, it just seems like the junior playing experience can be done in a much better way. I think Dave mentioned earlier how it's like a free for all now. They just opened it up to everybody. You know, it was a lot better before when it was you had to earn your way into all the big events.
Yeah, for our listeners, it's come up before the Battle of Boca. It's a great service. Tournaments every week. I mean, there's some downside. It's always on hard court. And yeah, they do shorten the scoring system, but everybody's doing that. It's no ad. It's tiebreaker. It's in the main draw, the consolation, the back draw sets to 4. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but it's there. I mean, kids aren't, getting on an airplane and then renting a car, checking into a hotel. But I said this to one parent, and I've said it many times, the parent should boycott tennis. The entry fees are just out of control. And one parent said that wouldn't work because people that are really, really wealthy would say, oh, this is great because now there's less kids in the tournament and it's easier to go home with a 2-inch trophy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think improving the UTR, I think it's how you put your feet on the floor, and when you get up in the morning, how do you live your life? I think that most people, you guys could comment on this, are told just go play more tournaments. And if you still have the same holes in your game, going to play more tournaments, Gideon Ariel, he mentioned about being on our podcast. Vic Braden's partner, biomechanist, said you're just going to be a happy loser. I mean, it's the physics of tennis. If you can't hit it, you can't hit it. You don't have this shot, you don't have that shot.
I'm a big believer too. It shouldn't take entry fee to teach you to be a warrior and a competitor. And I mean, I get the vibe might be a little bit more unique, I guess, if it's a tournament for people. But I think there's plenty of situations you can go to, and not just tennis, but other sport where people got ready for the big show, on the practice court, and their mentality there is what readied them for that moment long before it. And whether it was Andreescu at the U.S. Open, and when she snapped at the people that were interviewing her, calling her kind of an overnight success, and she replied something along the lines like she's been working her off for years for this moment. And
it was Bianca Andreescu.
Yeah, Andreescu, when and Serena had oodles more experience under the limelight at Ash and at the Slams, but I think that I think that the practice environment needs to have some emotional investment for people. Doesn't mean it has to be like I got to win this practice that to where I sacrifice developing my game, but I think that there's got to be a strong emotional investment and mind body engaged in a way at practice where when you walk onto a court for an actual tournament, it should be no different. It shouldn't take entry fee, and it shouldn't take an airline flight and hotels and all that to get a kid jazzed. So they have to be able to bring that each day.
One of our guests, Rafa Nadal, what's your goal? My next practice will be my best practice. And yeah, you just can't go through the motions.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, some college coaches say, well, if you come here, your UTR will really improve. And if it were to improve 0.25 over a 4-year period, but that's, not to pick on college coaches, but if someone in a 4-year period, how much are they climbing? And it's not a rapid climb. It's not, someone's a 7 and you tell the parents, well, if they do this, this, and this, in 6 months, they'll be a 9. And not many people are improving 2 points that fast.
I mean, I don't know what the current setup of that algorithm is, but it used to be based on 30 matches or so. So, it's like every match is about 3%. It was a much longer timetable than what parents wanted to hear. Basically, I actually thought the previous system, the tennis recruiting, was a little bit more. I guess I could see pros and cons of the other one, right? Tennis recruiting only took wins, and now UTR kind of rewards you for close losses. But I guess no system is perfect, but I've just viewed UTR now for a long time On my own end, more like on an individual stroke basis, I'd want to focus on, let's say, how would we define your first serve? Is your first serve a 9, a 10, or whatever? And work that way and try to develop a player that way with an idea of how to play a match. But the people that are just trying to, cheat the system and trying to bump up a few points, I mean, I just don't think there's a way to help them.
One great story is Tracy Austin. She had already made her mark. I mean, she was, 7 in the world. She was way up there. And she still played Junior Whiteman Cup, to take a step down and play Junior Whiteman Cup. You want to play anybody and everybody. It's like Jimmy Connors said a long time ago, always play your age group. Now, arguably, he's from one of the best age groups ever. I think 51, 52. You just rattle off so many great players, American players. Then you have to really, really be dominating to play up. And, and even a practice player, somebody that, if a junior player could play a veteran player. I told a player this just today, and, just because you can beat that player 1-on-1, play him every week. You get a chance to, say in this case, a 17-year-old girl, call this person up and they can hook you up with somebody who's 50 years old who'll play some singles with you. You get on clay and you just go out and play, and you don't have to play your only game. You're just going to try to, hit a big forehand and try to end the point. I think in that sense, tennis players become elitist. It's one thing to be elite, but you don't want to be elitist. And they become snobs where they won't play anybody and everybody. And I think a lot of times everybody wants to play up, but I think more match play, but as you said, it doesn't have to be on an entry fee. And I'm going to play this person and my shot tolerance isn't very good. I don't keep many balls in play. I'm just going to stay back and granted you got to work on your strengths, but I'm going to work on my weakness. I'm going to go play this person. And, I'm just going to stay back and keep a million balls in play.
I think of Dave Sievertson again when you say that, Steve, because, he was a solid player. And, when we connected, but he wasn't on his way to becoming a legend in senior tennis anyways. And he quickly, we hit a lot of balls, but I think the fact that why he grew so much is he'd just walk in the facility and he'd say, who do you want me to hit with? And he preferred to hit with younger players, 12, 13, 14-year-old boys and girls who kept a lot of balls going. And he wasn't a big fan of hitting with, some of the older guys, much like Corda's parents made him hit with the girls. And Dave would play exactly like that. He'd hit through the middle and let them run him, or he would work on a particular pattern, no matter how young they were. And when he was off kind of starting his quest and winning all these national events a few years back, and all his peer group was, curious and, hey, what are you doing? And he said, I go to this club and this guy puts me with 12-year-old girls. And they said, no, what are you really doing? He goes, no, that's it. And they go, well, what are you doing for cross training? He goes, I play tennis. He goes, my cross training for tennis is tennis and I run. And so, I loved his approach to just keeping it simple. And I think that's just a lost thing now. You get kids going through, hours with personal training and every gadget and hurdles and ladders, et cetera. And they look like they could play for the Dallas Cowboys in a wide receiver position going through that, but then the ball's 5 feet from them on a court and they don't run. And at the end of the day, again, it's a moot point. Heart, guts, grit, fight. And I think all of those things, in my opinion, are a direct result from abundance, not necessity. And I think necessity is what breeds champions.
I think you just take the 4 areas. I know Natalia Sorkin, she's been out to your place, whether it was for 6 months or 6 days. I mean, she's been there several times. And there's a lot to be said about when she states mental toughness is going to come from physical fitness. Vince Lombardi, fatigue makes cowards of us all. But, the kids to go out with a stopwatch, run on their own and do the extras. But you have to take the 4 areas. And I really think that, it all does start with, the mental side, mental, emotional, right attitude, right work ethic, but your skills, over and over again, we repeat many things here, but winning is a byproduct of skills. Confidence comes from winning. Winning comes from skills. Skills come from practice and know-how. But I think it's a lifestyle attitude of the household. I don't think there's any set answer, but if you got a crummy backhand, you got to take care of your crummy backhand. If you want your UTR to go up, you got to improve weaknesses. Certainly keep refining, improving upon strengths. I got one last topic here. Question is change. Does everyone have to totally rebuild their game, redo, go back to scratch? Of course, the type of work I've done for many, many years is people send me a student. They get off the airplane and we film, and also then we evaluate. And their goal, for example, realistically, is to play college tennis and beyond. And then how old are they? There's so many variables: the length of stay, how long are they going to be here? But to give them information, say here's a pathway. But I do think with change, I'll just start with this, and then you and Andres can comment, David, that if people are not used to working on technique, and then you expose them to technique, and they might be 15 years old, and they've never done static balance training. They've never done, okay, let's get in front of a mirror and go through this. They've never done that type of training. It's like a shock to them. But why don't you guys comment on that? Andres, I know you certainly can take the role of devil's advocate too, because I know you've been hanging out with me for 10 years now, but Anderson, we're going towards 40.
Well, I mean, I just, what you mentioned about every scenario being different. I mean, it really depends on the age of the kid. And I think back to people that I've worked with over the years. I remember one girl in particular, the one that I went to go watch at the NCAAs. I met her when she was in 11th grade, and she was, like a 3-star. And, within 6 months, she had really blossomed into like a 5-star player. And, it wasn't enough time for me to really make a complete rebuild in her game, just because it was going to ruin, or not ruin maybe, but it would really affect the ability for her to get a scholarship, which for her family was a pretty big thing. So, it kind of depends on the age, on the personality, how the kid learns. Obviously, if you're talking about getting a goal-oriented junior that wants to play in college, you need to have all the skills in place. But I think at least from my own experience coming here with a lot of different kids over the years with you, I usually try to focus on certain areas and get their interest going based on seeing quick improvement in certain things that they don't know how to do. But the real problem I would say with people that I've seen in the past here is that when they come here and they get the information, they get the work, it's hard to follow through with that plan once you go out of here, because basically the pro that they might have come from, I'm not sure that there's going to be that same level of detail or continued work once they're away from here. So kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. It's just seems like there's less and less qualified coaches that can really teach kids to play all over the court. So pass it to Dave.
Well, Steve, it's like you said, you get in recent years, people are sending you players to do the dirty work for them. And you've done dirty work for me. And you're doing a lot of rehabilitation work that isn't glamorous. It's not sexy. And there's that kind of side that when people think of change, I like to just sub the word improvement in for change, because people can swallow that word a lot easier than the word change for some reason. And but they haven't seen change occur where it's you can make changes and make improvements inside of people's games much more subtly. again, thinking back, just flashes in my mind, and watching you help Gerald Kaiser on the hill at Tyler back when they had the courts up on the hill by the dorms. And, he was a good South African player playing at UT Tyler, which was one of the top NAIs. But he would rework his hand, refinger his hand on the grip as he would go to serve, and he had a slightly open face. And I remember you helping him with that. And those are subtle changes that I've, had the privilege of watching you make in people and molding them. And it's a stark contrast to just pure rehabilitation work. And so I think people can make adjustments, and I think that it can happen at any time. I think it just comes down to, as a teacher, all of us have gotten kind of an instinct as to whether somebody's veins are open or not. And to me, I prefer to not really have people on the court unless it has a productive role. In regard to the parents, if it has a productive role, I think either picking up balls or there's an observation that's going to help them better understand what's going on, I'm all for that. And I do like to have them there for anytime there's going to have to be improvements or changes made, because with that always comes video. And, through the video, I think that change is much easier. And you can document it, and you can go, not just, you can film 10 times in a lesson, and many times it's better instantly, and then you can make a believer out of people. Ben Singer made probably shouldn't mention names, but he made an adjustment on his serve that was positive within 2-3 balls, and then to see the film in it, to see the film a few minutes later and see the adjustment, and that makes sense, and that's tracking better, and I think that people buy off on it. But like Andre said, when they're not in your sight, are they going to continue? Are they going to be able to stay the course with it, either from their own work ethic or, to me, people have to just rely on themselves and themselves only. I don't think they, once they get the knowledge, they got to really take the ownership of it on themselves. And even if they're 10 years old, they have to assume that role if they want to get somewhere. But change is never easy. My father-in-law, who was a brilliant, he was a brilliant guy in life, but in business, and that course he taught, I think I may have brought it up here before, but the breaking of denial has to happen first. There's a bunch of steps, but until denial is broken, change isn't going to take place. And I think whether it's us trying to work in people's games, or whether it's the incredible efforts made from the GreatBase to try to influence, the tennis teaching and coaching community to be a little more proactive in helping build the growth of the game and the health of the game. Until denial is broken, I think that, we're going to run into more and more hurdles.
Oh, those are great points. One thing with going back to Andre's tennis recruiting for the listeners, just Google that. And that was before the UTR. That was the language. Before that, it was your UST in this country, your USTA ranking. But to go from a 3-star to a 5-star, that's very healthy. For us, I just think of Dennis Vandermeer. Your shot times, you can only hit 3 balls, and now you can hit 4. You've improved 33%. And so people can. That's a great effort to go from a 3-star to a 5-star in 6 months. A running program, first step out the door, and it's not just the mile time. We put kids through a tiebreaker test. People know you got to hit 6 shots, courtesy feed, and the 4 large quadrants of a court. And kids can really have a high sectional ranking, very high, and they lose 07. But then to take that home with you, when people come to visit us, one challenge, I think hardship, we've all heard it, that's a positive. Adversity is a blessing. So when people come to work with us and they go home and they don't have a coach to hold their hand, in some ways that's better. You got to do it on your own. with, for us, we put together Tennis Intelligence Applied. It's a 25-hour course. It's quite old now. But because there was no college credit assigned to it, a lot of people were not completing the course. So then we have a short course called GreatBase. Made a video for today for a young gal, hardworking, obedient, disciplined. And I've been training her dad to teach tennis. And on the backhand side, at the top of the swing, the racket face is completely hooded. So for someone to say, well, I'm going to watch this clip on my backhand, or I'm going to go through the cycle. So we have this course, GreatBase, and I'm going to watch the serve. And it might be like a 5-minute explanation with it being the serve being demonstrated. I'm going to watch that. I'm going to get in front of the mirror. And instead of thinking that some coach has a magic pill or some magic wand where they're going to present something to you that's going to be the way for you to all of a sudden just wake up and now you're a new player. But yeah, there's no substitute for work. Ben Singer, he's a very athletic guy. He mentioned his name. He came here from Connecticut with his dad. Then he went back. His story's a little bit different. He went back and he worked with a coach that you and I trained years ago, Richard Bodian, total technician. I think probably a lot of people watch Richard and would just misunderstand what he does. He's a throwback. He can teach people how to hit the ball, and to say, well, he's a purist. So now he's out in Texas working with you. But his dad came and they spent a week here, and the dad watched what we do, and he had the chance to talk to some parents. And the parents said, well, and we document development. This is where my child was a year and a half ago, and this is where they are now. So two heads are better than one. And I think a lot of times the parent, they really need to be proactive where they understand the process. I think to come back to a redo it's just how people evaluate that. Many times I think they make a mountain out of a molehill. You just have to make a slight grip adjustment. And we know grip adjustments are quite difficult. But if you remain the same, you're going to lose. Because and then I think a lot of times people don't understand there's younger kids that say, an 18-year-old junior is not even thinking about these clubs that, or the program they're in, that there's a 12-year-old. And you and I know, Andres knows this as well, is that, the 12-year-old's better. Brain versus brawn. Who's a better tennis player right now is that no one has a crystal ball, but the kid who has better skills, not the kid who's just slap happy. And so it's really just misunderstood. I know it when we had the program trained tennis teachers, we used to write for every ad from every tennis camp. With one, we were studying marketing. We were studying, just brochures, and rainy days, people would even go into a lab where they had to design a brochure, 3-fold, 4-fold. There's ways to do it just with a blank piece of paper. And a lot of times, and you're right, I understand where you're coming from, to not use the word change, but hey, it's broken, it needs to be fixed. But those are the words. It was, okay, we're going to adjust, we're going to adapt, we're going to refrain, we're going to work within your game. And there's a lot of truth to that. College coaches, I hear them say many times, well, it's too late by the time they're 18. But there's so many stories to draw from in every sport where people have made changes. But I think what happens with college coaches is that not enough in tennis, by a long ways, do coaches have a redshirt program.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to recruit you, but when you come to our program, like in basketball and football, especially in football, you're going to redshirt. You do everything the team's doing, but we're going to save your eligibility, and we're going to have you get developed.
You basically redshirted George Goldoff after college.
Yeah,
redshirted him onto the pro tour.
With and that's where. I also, too, wishful thinking. You wouldn't want to have George going, I wish I did this in juniors. I wish I did this in college. But it's not that easy. I think of Jimmy Johnson, who coached George. He's in Southern California, Bonanza Land. And, people will go just like they do here to South Florida. They're going to go to Southern Cal. They want to be with the big boys, the big gals. Big boys, big girls, and play competitive tennis. And then they get there and it's like, well, We know that you've been very successful in New England or the Midwest or wherever, but let's evaluate your game. Same thing with a college coach is how many college coaches will have a player? I mean, the kid probably wouldn't even go there if they're a blue chip and go, no, we're not going to play you the first year because we want to develop you. I think one thing we could end on very quickly is with tennis teachers, the greatest of all time. And I don't think in tennis teaching there's the greatest of all time. I was asked that the other day, how many people I've taught to teach tennis. And, Andy Fitzell, who started this podcast, for example, he's a Bradenite. He spent so much time with Vic, but he also spent a lot of time with me. So indirectly, and he's out teaching, he has the influence of, all these other coaches, not just our pillars from the GreatBase, but in the course Tennis Intelligence Play, we mentioned over 100 coaches. And, you learn from yourself, you learn from your students. But why don't you guys comment on the greatest tennis teacher of all time?
Greatest tennis teacher of all time. That is you stumped me there. I was actually, when you mentioned the redshirt program, I just started thinking about the Miami Heat here in basketball now that they got in the finals, and just the amount of players they draft with the idea of basically redshirting them. They had like the Serbian kid that they drafted last year, barely play him. They literally sit him out for an entire year, teach him how to get physically stronger, this and that. So it's crazy how, like in tennis, you don't see this. But the other point that came to my mind when you guys were talking about that, was going to ask Dave, is how many of these kids that come to you, and you say you're filming sometimes 10 times in a lesson, how many of these kids come to you for the first time and have never been filmed in the past? That's something that to me stuns me.
Go ahead.
How many times I ask kids and they've never been filmed. And, it's something I do constantly. And it's just amazing to me that I've heard in this day and age that people are never filmed.
Yeah, the number's way too high. A lot of people don't see themselves on film often enough. I think parents film their kids more than coaches often. And, but quite a few. Yeah, it's a pretty high number. Even more shocking is the number of kids when I, say goodbye to them, they go off to college, and they'll come back and in the course of a year, they really haven't seen anything on film. Even, at places where the matches are being, streamed every time, and they're archived, and they could go back and watch them and study them. And again, if the kid, when they tell me that, I'm going to get on the kid first, that they know better, and they have a friend with a phone, and all they have to do is use the kid's phone. And if they get lost, they can send it to my phone, and I can put it in my app and put it back to them in 2 minutes, right, with my voice on it. So there's really no way out of it for them. But I think that, it's one thing. Again, it goes to core knowledge too of the coaches. It's one thing to film it; it's another thing to kind of know what you're looking at. And then I think where the people like Braden certainly comes to my mind as one of the people that jump out. And then somebody, Steve, like yourself, who over your lifetime, and it's with a separator to me is who can get it done. A lot of people can identify how that kid has no backhand volley, but fewer people can, address it. And yet fewer even can take it onto the court and go through a rational approach with skills and drills and verbal cues and such, and get it corrected. And I think that's where, I think there's a small group probably in the history of, that I think a lot of people can get it in the ballpark, but sometimes things end up reasonably okay just through repetition. Truthfully, Braden, obviously Vandermeer, those guys come to mind. but I only got to see Vic in person when he was at a different stage of his life. Steve, you were around him at a different time when, you know, and I would have loved to have, you know, got in the time machine and watched him work when he was kicking out, you know, 2 out of 3 ranked juniors in SoCal. And that would have been a really cool thing to be able to see firsthand and experience, because the kind of work that he was doing would have been incredible. And, but yeah, I mean,
yeah, no, I think
that's what comes to my head.
I think one thing with basketball, I think of Yannick Noah, maybe the coolest guy. Guga's way up there. The coolest guy ever in tennis is Joaquim, is his son, right? Yep. I don't know. I can't remember whether it was at Florida or it was when he played in the NBA for Chicago. But there was one year where maybe it was going into college where they basically sit down and we got to teach you how to play. He one time was the MVP. I know he won a couple NCAA titles. Yep. But that rebuilding phase, I do think, to say this because I know a lot of parents listen to this, there's levels of play, so many different levels of play. There's different levels of tennis teaching, you know, the competence factors. There's levels of parenting. You know, do we just say, okay, we're focusing on tennis? There's nothing wrong with being a beginner. Now, obviously, parents are not beginners in life, but they're beginners going down this tennis path. And everybody has to start somewhere. You know, coming back to Vic and what he accomplished at the Jack Kramer Club, you know, tennis wasn't a global sport at that time. You know, once the wall came down in Berlin, and then tennis just exploded in Eastern Europe. It was very suppressed, although it was played in Romania and former Yugoslavia. There's certain places, definitely Czechoslovakia. But with Braden, you create one, you create two. Now, just like when you and I were working together in these small neighboring towns in East Texas, and Chad Clark went off and he won the high school state tournament. At that time, everybody played high school tennis, and then the kids who were training around him, from the Lindales to the Van, these small towns surrounding East Texas, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, all these high school titles were won, and so people have to have that inner belief system. With tennis, does the place make the pro, or does the pro make the place? And many times, place is pretty fancy and it's pretty nice, and what does it produce? But it does need to produce a work ethic. It needs to produce energy. It needs to produce community, but it also needs to have nuts and bolts. And I do think with like, say, for example, Dennis Vandermeer, there's so many people that taught Dennis Vandermeer, but certainly Tom Stowe comes to mind. With Braden, just his curiosity, but the things that he learned by being a manager on the pro circuit, by managing tournaments, working for Vic Braden. I know Joel Trucker, just talks about the learning curve that Braden, by just, certainly being a film buff, and then also, even though he, by formal study, he was a psychologist, a self-made biomechanist, I have some collector items. I have a film of Braden teaching tennis in the 60s, and he changed. Once you find out a better way. So we've talked about change. We've talked about, the greatest, tennis player of all time, or the greatest tennis teacher of all time. I just think that there's different levels. When you get to a certain level, and also too, there's a chemistry. Like what coach will work for the other coach, and if you have a system together, like you have 25 pros working for you, maybe the least experienced pro is going to say the right thing to a kid. Whether that's a buzzword or a phrase. And I guess I'll end by saying that I love the line that it takes a village to raise a kid. You could think, okay, it takes a village to raise a tennis player. But I like the added on lines, but no one tells you where the village is or how to get there. But let's close out this podcast. Greatest of all time.
That was a good one.
Greatest podcast of all time, or greatest player?
No, we're going with player on this one. This is not topping the Steve and Andy brain types one there. That was my personal favorite.
I actually have a hard time believing that people listen to these podcasts, but I get feedback where people tell us to keep doing it. In fact, Andy Fitzell, I said to him, one time I said, well, we can just go do it every other week, do it once a month. And he said, no, every week. I said, okay.
Brave talk when he's not here.
No, I'm supposed to have Andy on as a guest after Wimbledon. We had a couple of people request, and we thought it would have been great. I mean, he's a great tennis mind. I hear that all the time about Brian Shelton, which is a really good line. You know, his son's being interviewed, and we got to get Brian Shelton on and talk about Bill Tim. He was and still is. I mean, Scotty Perlman told me the other day he's going strong, and he's got to be 80. And he's all excited about a junior he's working with, and he was the voice of the USPTA, and you know he was Brian Shelton's mentor. And you know, I know when we were training tennis teachers back in the day, we used a lot of Bill Tim's ideas just on managing a pro. He had 3x5 cards.
Yeah,
you take a lesson, and you just know there's no cell phones. You know, you just write down a 3x5 card. And he was the head pro, but to take another lesson from him, you had, I think it was 3 1/2-hour lessons you had to take from his staff. And it was like, you know, once a month, or maybe once every 2 weeks, whatever it was, you're going to get a lesson from Bill. And it's amazing, you know, I think many times with a tennis lesson, I've used to say this all the time, is that you can just turn the tape recorder on, because you tell the kid the same thing lesson after lesson. And it's like we you know, let's get beyond the forehand, and let's work on moving through, you know, half volleys on the forehand and backhand side. And it's like, no, we just get stuck in the mud, and we end up going at a snail's pace. But if I were to just repeat one thing, is that what David said is that in the end, you got to do it on your own. You got to take ownership. You don't want to be relying on a coach. But guys, thanks for being part of the podcast.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Good night.
Yeah.
Good night. Take a nap there, Anderson.
Yeah.
Get some sleep.
I'm going to be up in 4 hours. All right. You guys have a good night.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. Adios.
Take care. Bye-bye.
It's time for your famous line to end every podcast, isn't it?
My Spanish is a little better than yours, right?
Yeah, probably. By now.
Hasta la vista. Is that what I say?
No, adios, amigos.
I think adios, amigos.
Sign
All right.
off.
All right. Wave goodbye to the camera, Andres. Good job. Thank you for helping us with these podcasts. It's awesome.
153 in the books.
Yeah. Wow.